Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN WhatIf, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku had the quirk to see the invisible girl's tears? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Remember to make a wish. Every year, the same words. I know, Mom. I gotta think of something. It was a lie. She already knew what she would wish for. But she would play along, waiting an appropriate amount of time before taking a deep breath and blowing out the candles. What did you wish for, sweetie? Dad, you know I can't tell you. It won't come true if I do that. His grin widened as he rested his hand on her head, just a little off-center, and ruffled her hair. Never hurts to ask, does it? The girl shared a laugh with her parents as the cake was cut and passed. Their conversation moved on quickly as her dad shared stories from work and her mom gushed about the children she taught. It was a routine, one she was comfortable with. It was easy for her to be the upbeat, bubbly girl her parents had raised. Mom, Dad, mind if I excuse myself? I still have a bit of homework I need to get done. Her mother smiled at her. Of course. Dad and I will clean up, so don't worry about that. She took a moment to give her parents a hug and embrace goodnight before heading upstairs. There was a soft click as the lock on her door slid into place. After habitually testing the door handle, the girl slipped out of her clothes, laying them neatly atop her dresser before gently sliding her window open. I'll tell them next year, she muttered to herself as she stepped out into the warm summer night. The shingles were rough on her feet, but it was nothing she wasn't used to. It'd be so much easier if they could just look me in the eye. She arrived at her usual perch, laying back against the warm roof and gazing up at the stars. This was the final part of her annual ritual. With a breath to steady herself, she whispered the words that had been repeated in her mind for years. I wish someone could see me. And with that, Toru cried. His hand fumbled across the nightstand, searching for the blaring alarm clock only to knock it onto the floor. Pressing his face into his pillow, he groaned loudly, straining to reach the beeping abomination. Izuku! Inko's voice came in from the hallway. Is everything okay in there? A second groan escaped him as he lifted his head. Everything's fine. I just dropped my alarm clock. Again. Finally, after a few more seconds of grumbling and feeling around, blessed silence filled the room. Izuku breathed a sigh of relief before pulling his covers off him and moving to a sitting position at the edge of his bed. Still slightly groggy, he shuffled his way to the bathroom door, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He pressed his hand to the wall, sliding it up until he reached the dual SW. After a brief hesitation, he flipped on the fan. A few minutes later, Izuku stepped out into the hallway. Immediately the smell of fresh toast and the sound of sizzling eggs hit him. He couldn't stop the smile that followed. Smells amazing, Mum. He felt her turn towards him as he stepped into the kitchen, reaching for the handle on the fridge. It was a minor struggle, but he managed to pour himself a glass of milk. I hope you don't mind, but I may have added a little more cheese to your eggs than usual this time. His mother's smile sounded almost sheepish. He just smiled back in her direction. It's okay, really. He sniffed at the food when he felt his mom turn away. A little more than usual was putting it lightly, but it didn't seem like it'd be unbearable. His tongue disagreed. While the milk and toast helped, Izuku had a feeling he'd be tasting cheddar for the rest of the day. The humming from his watch broke their morning chatter, alerting them both that he would need to leave soon for school. After helping his mom clear the table, he gave her a quick hug and a peck on the cheek, then turned to grab his bag and shoes. Be careful on your way to school, Inko called. Are you sure you have everything you need? His smile returned briefly. Yes, Mom. I have everything. He could hear her smile in return. But I love you, Eyes. I love you too. With that, Izuku pulled open the front door and opened his eyes. Deku. The green-haired boy looked up, stopping his muttering. Hi, Kaken. The smile on his face tugged at Katsuki's heart, bringing the guilt he'd keep hidden for years dangerously close to the surface. Why you ready for the tea test today? The blonde huffed, pushing the guilt away. Of course I am. He forced a grin onto his face. And you better be too. Especially if you still want to go to UA. Izuku's grin widened. You know it. Even if I can't get into the hero course, their general studies program is still nothing to sneeze at. Then we better get going. Katsuki turned and started off in the direction of their school, barely hiding the tears forming in his eyes. Can't pass the test as we're gonna be late? Why did he have to say that with a smile? He thought, gritting his teeth as they walked. I know he forgave me already, but, damn it, I still can't forgive myself. Shut up, Deku, he growled. I don't need a quirkless loser like you looking down on me. A small explosion burst from his palm as he shoved the other child back. Izuku cried out before landing on his back, head hitting a rock sticking out of the creek bed. See, you can't even protect yourself from. Katsuki's words trailed off, eyes widening. A small trickle of red was flowing down the side of the rock and into the water. Everything was a blur from there. He remembered someone carrying his friend away. He remembered the sirens as his parents followed the ambulance to the hospital. He remembered his friend lying on a white bed, bandages all around his head. As young as Katsuki was, he didn't understand everything the doctor said to his mom and Auntie Inko. There was just one phrase that echoed in his mind. That your son is blind. The final bell rang through the school, signaling the end of classes and the start of the weekend, and Toru could not get out of that building fast enough. The warm spring air felt glorious and she took a moment to bask in the unobstructed sunlight before making her way home. As she walked, she swung her bag around and pulled out her phone, checking for any messages she may have missed while in class. Nothing important there, aside from her parents telling her they would be home late that evening. Toru sighed with relief at the revelation. She now had the freedom to head to the park and relax before heading home. So that's exactly what she did. The park was her haven. There, she could lay out in the sun, read, do homework, you name it. But the best part about the park was the people. No one cared that she was invisible. In fact, most people kept to themselves, minding their own business while others minded theirs. This isn't to say that she hated being around her loved her school friends. She knew they accepted her for who she was, invisible or not. But for some reason, she never felt fully comfortable. The friendly jokes, that's "I'm sorry, I didn't see you there" comments, the eye contact that was always just a little bit off. She knew it wasn't or meant to be harmful, mean-spirited. It still hurt. Her thoughts continued this way as her feet followed the familiar path to the park. But then she turned a corner and walked face first into something green. Ow geez. Toru pushed herself upright, rubbing her forehead to soothe the dull ache growing there. I'm so sorry, a nervous voice mumbled to her side. I didn't hear you coming. It's fine, she sighed as she moved into a proper sitting position. Guess I can be easy to miss, huh? As she spoke, she noticed the boy turn in her direction, tilting his head slightly as if confused. You know, 'cause I'm invisible and all? There was a brief pause before the boy grinned and nodded, giving something of a nervous chuckle. Why yeah, I guess that'd do it. The boy reached for his backpack, patting the ground twice before his hand landed on the strap and he pulled it to him. Did I hit his eye or something when we collided? Toru figured she shouldn't just stare and reached behind her, relieved to feel her bag had stayed on her shoulder in the fall. A soft groan caught her attention and she turned back to the other kid. It couldn't have fallen out, since the zipper is still closed. It's not in my pocket either. The only option is that it fell out on the way here? Maybe it's still under the tree or something? Toru quirked an eyebrow, slightly amused at his speed, mumbling. Hey! The boy kept going. She giggled, then tapped his shoulder lightly. Hey! He jumped at the contact, turning towards her and clutching his bag before opening his eyes and relaxing a little. She suppressed another giggle. Did you lose something? If you need help finding it? Oh yeah. The boy rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I left my phone at the park. Toru grinned. Well, I'm actually heading that way right now. Want a hand? A relieved smile lit up the boy's face, making his freckles even more pronounced. That would be great. If you don't mind, that is. She pushed herself to her feet, offering her gloved hand to help the boy up. Hey, it's the least I could do. Her voice trailed off as the boy stood, pulling his arms through the straps of his bags. Did he just ignore Dash? That's when she noticed his eyes. Eye contact was a rare thing for Toru. Not that she could blame anyone. People would try, but were usually off by a couple of centimeters. This boy, however, was way off the mark. It was almost as if, he's blind. The boy flinched slightly, making Toru do the same as she realized he'd hurt her. Wait, I'm blind. I'm sore dash. He waved off her coming apology. No, it's fine. His smile grew. It's not like it's an obvious thing. It took her a moment to realize what he meant, then she noticed his eyes. The usual faded color or milkiness associated with blindness wasn't there. Instead, his eyes were a bright emerald. The only tell would be the fact that he didn't look directly at her when speaking. She couldn't help but laugh a little. I guess you're right. I mean, it took me a good while to notice, and I pride myself on being perceptive. His smile grew as he laughed with her. It probably helps when no one knows you're watching. The laughter continued for a few moments before the boy coughed awkwardly. I don't suppose you'd be okay guiding me? Toru could swear she saw a slight blush on the boy's face. Sure. I'd be rude not to, right? Without thinking, she took the boy's hand and started heading down the alley towards the park. Why I can just hold on to why your shoulder? If she wasn't completely invisible, Toru knew her face would have been redder than a stop sign. The hell was I thinking, grabbing his hand like that? The walk to the park couldn't have taken more than a few minutes, but for Izuku, it felt much longer. Here he was, hand on a girl's shoulder, walking to the park. Nothing out of the ordinary. It's not like she has a cute voice or anything. The girl stiffened slightly, causing Izuku's heart to seize slightly. Did I say that out loud? When he felt her roll her shoulder under his hand, he realized she was just stretching and barely stopped himself from breathing a sigh of relief. Why his voice cut through the silence between them. I probably should have asked your name back there. He felt her laugh more than he heard it. You're fine. I'm Hagakure Toru. Her voice reflected her smile. I could have asked too, Why yeah, I guess you're right. He rubbed the back of his head in slight embarrassment. I'm Midoriya, by the way. Midoriya Izuku. The sounds around him shifted as they left the buildings, opening up to reveal the trees and bushes of the local park. Hagakure was slightly bouncing with excitement, and he couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. Okay, so where do you think you left your phone? She asked, turning slightly to face him. Midoriya tilted his head slightly, listening. He turned, pulling the girl with him slightly. I spent most of time over here. The two continued walking in the direction he indicated. Toru could hear him clicking his tongue as he seemed to look around the park. Nervous habit? As they approached one of the larger oak trees in the middle of the grass, he stopped them. I teach we're by a tree, right? How did he? Why Toru replied. Is this your phone? Green All Might case? She nodded. Yep. As she stood, she swiped the phone open, quickly putting in her number and calling herself, ending the call as soon as she felt her own phone vibrate. The boy had his hand out, a smile on his face. Thank you again, Hagakure, Midoriya sighed as she placed the phone in his hand. It would have taken a lot longer finding it on my own. Toru quirked an eyebrow. Well, you certainly knew how to get back here, she said, curiosity filling her voice. The boy blushed. How did you even do that? He stammered a bit, obviously a little uncomfortable at the question. She realized her mistake in an instant and started waving her arms in apology. Sorry, I didn't mean it like that. It's just that you seem to get around really well for a blind guy, and I was kinda surprised at that and dash. His laughter cut her off. Hagakure, you're fine. The boy's smile brought out his freckles even more. You're not wrong though. I get around better than I probably should. It's just, the uncomfortable look was back. I never really know how to explain it. Toru was very grateful that he couldn't see the blush forming on her face. Oh, well then maybe you can explain it to me some other time? I kinda maybe used your phone to give me your number. Midoriya froze, his face paling before flushing bright red. Oh well then He took a deep breath to steady himself. Wow, I never had that happen before. A nervous chuckle escaped his lips. Then he felt his wrist and froze. CRP, I gotta go. Sorry Hagakure and thanks again for helping find my phone. Toru could only smile as she watched the boy hurry away. A minute passed before she sunk down against the tree. Holy shit, Toru. What was that? You just met the guy and gave him your number without asking? She hit her head against the trunk of the tree a few times as she mentally berated herself. Well, hopefully he won't think too much of it. Holy see, I actually talked to a girl. Izuku's grin hadn't faded one bit since leaving the park. I talked to a girl and she gave me her number and she even sounded kinda cute. He paused briefly just outside the door to his apartment. Wait, I totally forgot to ask about her quirk, he groaned, slapping his forehead in frustration. Well, I guess I can ask another time. Not like I can really take notes without using my braille typer. The door was unlocked, telling him his mom was home. He pushed it open and kicked off his shoes. I'm home. Welcome home, dear, his mother called from the kitchen. Dinner should be ready soon. He smiled, taking in a deep breath and sighing as the smell of stir-fry filled his nostrils. I'll be in my room. As the door closed behind him, Izuku felt his phone go off in his pocket. New message from unknown sender. Play, he said, triggering the voice activation on the device. The automated voice emanated from his pocket. Hey Midoriya, it's Hagakure. Just making sure you got my number. It was nice meeting you today. Izuku. Inko's voice reverberated through the door. Who was that? The smile on his face stretched wide. It's a friend, I made a new friend today. Sunlight streamed through the small gap in the blinds, drawing a thin line of optic pain directly over the invisible girl's eyes. Toru rolled onto her side with a groan, pulling the pillow over her head to escape the luminous assault. The only issue with this was that now she could see her alarm clock. A yelp reverberated through the room as sheets, covers, and a plush dog were thrown aside as Toru sprinted to the bathroom. No, I can't be late again. In record time she had shed her sleepwear and started the shower, opting to brush her teeth simultaneously. Her short hair was still damp as she rushed to the kitchen, packing a quick to-go breakfast and lunch, then shouting "Gata training babakladder beat" before sprinting out the front door. Her pace didn't slow until she arrived at her train, barely making it before the doors closed behind her. To her good fortune, there were very few people riding the train today, so she had plenty of room to collapse in a seat and eat her breakfast. 30 minutes later, the train gently came to a stop. Toru realized she'd nearly fallen back to sleep after finishing her sandwich, so she made sure to grab a small cup of coffee at the small cafe before leaving the station behind. The walk to her trainer's gym was a pleasant one as usual. Open streets lined with trees allowed copious amounts of sunlight through, yet provided adequate shade to escape the summer heat. With the clearness of the day, Toru couldn't help but be in a good mood as she made her way down the sidewalk. Good morning, Miss Fushiki, she called, pushing open the door of the small gym, the bell on the door tinkling lightly. The woman in question looked up from the small table in the back corner, brushing a strand of bright red hair out of her face and giving Toru a bright smile. Well, if it isn't my favorite student. You were almost late again. The invisible girl felt herself flush. I'm sorry, sensei. I promise I learned my lesson from last time. She bowed as a sign of sincerity, making her teacher laugh. I know you did, Ms. Fushiki replied, waving off the unnecessary apology. Now go ahead and change into your suit. We need to get going as soon as possible. This caused Toru to pause as she stuffed her bag into one of the lockers along the back wall. We're not training here? The smile on Ms. Fushiki's face did nothing to help the invisible girl's nervousness. Nope. Today we are going to do a field test. See how well you can apply what I've taught you so far. The walls of the near-empty waiting room seemed to amplify everything around them. The ticking of the clock, the creaking of chairs whenever someone shifted. Even his breathing seemed louder than usual in the enclosed space. Midoriya, a voice called from the now open doorway across the room. You can come on back now. Mother and son made their way across the waiting room, Izuku's hand resting on his mom's arm to make sure he didn't run into anything. Passing through the door, they followed the nurse a short distance before arriving at the designated observation room. Okay, so today is going to be a little different, the nurse said, her smile very evident in her voice. I'm going to take your vitals really quick, just like normal. However, Dr. Hashimoto is running a little behind right now, so we'll be taking your MRI as soon as we finish with the vitals here. Izuku nodded in understanding, and after a minute or two he was following the nurse down the hallway to the MRI room. The nurse handed him a standard hospital gown, ushering him into the nearby bathroom so he could change in private. Locking the door behind him, Izuku sighed, taking a deep breath before shedding his clothing. I wonder if they'll find anything new. Last time we couldn't stay around for the scan results, so maybe there's been a change? Maybe I'm getting better? His hopeful muttering continued through the entire changing process and even back into the hallway, only stopping when the nurse rested her hand on his shoulder and led him into the scanning room. You know the drill, just lie as still as you can. He knew his mom was laughing silently at him as he bounced up and down in his chair, but he couldn't help it. He was just too excited. Well, a deep voice filled the room as the door opened. Glad you were able to stay for the results this time. Izuku's bouncing slowed until it was barely noticeable, but the smile on his face only grew. Dr. Hashimoto was obviously excited as well, but he did his best to contain it as he attached the images from the scan to the light board on the wall. The doctor pulled out his stool and took a seat, facing the family. As you know, over these past few years, we've been monitoring Izuku's brain activity and development. His initial accident at the age of 4 left him with significant damage to his visual cortex, resulting in his current blindness. The boy's smile diminished slightly, but his excitement did not. We told you before how this could possibly result in a phenomenon called blindsight, where his eyes are still functioning but his brain isn't able to create a true image. Inko nodded, remembering the conversations of that day. Dr. Hashimoto stood, pointing out a few spots on the MRI images, explaining how they had requested to continue monitoring Izuku's brain development. The amount of damage he'd sustained made his version of blindsight a rather unique case. Recently, however, we've noticed something very odd. This caught Izuku's ear, causing him to still and turn all his attention to the man. While his visual cortex is still mostly destroyed, his brain seems to have been adjusting. He felt his mom shift next to him, obviously wanting to say something. It seems that in the past few years, his somatosensory and auditory cortices have expanded and joined with some of the visual pathways that were still intact. Inko's voice cut in, sounding slightly confused. So, what does all this mean exactly? Izuku nodded along, equally curious. The doctor sighed. We can't say for certain. As far as I'm aware, this has never happened before. The green-haired boy felt an odd sense of pride at that, knowing he was unique in at least one way. Our best guess is that his brain is trying to turn sound and touch into sight. Izuku felt his breath caught in his throat. You mean? Tears welled in his eyes. You mean I? It'd take practice, and probably a lot of patience. The doctor's smile filled his voice, but I'm fairly certain you could learn to see in your own way. Nothing could stop Izuku from crying at those words. Well, Hagakure, I have to say I'm impressed. Training hadn't been nearly as intensive as Toru had feared. Sure, it was difficult, and resulted in a few close calls. I almost had a book shoved into my crotch. Can we please leave the library now? But all in all, she felt really good about her performance. Well, I have been learning from the best. Ms. Fushiki smiled and ruffled the invisible girl's hair. Helps that you're such a fast learner. Hopefully you can keep it up when we get more into hand-to-hand. Their small talk continued until the pair reached the gym. Toru quickly changed into her regular clothes, bowed to her teacher, and stepped back out onto the sidewalk. The sun was getting lower in the sky, allowing the day to cool off somewhat. The girl took a deep breath of the summer air, smiling to herself as she stretched out a bit of her soreness before making her way to the train station. As she neared, her eyes landed on a familiar face, complete with wild green hair and freckles. Midoriya. The boy turned as if looking for the source of the voice. Hagakure, he asked. Who, Izuku? Toru paused, finally noticing the short green-haired woman next to her new friend. Oh. Mom, this is my friend, Hagakure, Izuku explained, gesturing towards the girl. She helped me find my phone a few days ago when I left it at the park on accident. Toru couldn't help but smile, bouncing slightly. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Midoriya. Izuku's mom smiled in return. Oh, just call me Inko, dear. The lady extended her hand, which Toru took. Izuku's told me a bit about you. Only the bad parts, Izuku explained with a smirk, making the girl giggle. We're just heading home for dinner, Inko explained, grabbing the girl's attention. We'd love for you to join us if you want. Toru froze briefly, seeing Izuku do the same. I'm not sure. She fidgeted nervously. I'd have to check with my parents. The older woman nodded understandingly. Of course, dear. Our train won't be here for a little while yet. Reaching into her pocket, the invisible girl pulled out her phone and took a few steps away from the boy and his mother. With a few swipes and taps, she held the device to her ear, listening to the dial tone. No answer. Nothing new. It's me. I'm going to be having dinner at a friend's house tonight. I'll be sure to be home before it gets too late. With a sigh, she hung up and pocketed her phone, turning back to the Midoriyas. Izuku heard her approach and quickly stopped muttering, a small flush present on his face. Inko simply smiled expectantly, not quite making eye contact. They said it'd be fine, just as long as I'm not out too late, Toru said, doing her best to sound cheerful. Inko's smile brightened. That's wonderful. We're so happy you could join us. The girl smiled sadly. As am I. Well, here we are, Inko said with a smile, leading the way into the small apartment. Izuku, you can show your friend around. I'll call you when dinner is ready. Thank you again for having me, Toru called as the green-haired woman retreated towards the kitchen. Next to her, Izuku shuffled nervously as he kicked off his shoes, laying them on the mat just next to the doorway. So, I guess we can just hang out in the living room? His voice trailed off. Toru, for her part, felt just as awkward. It had been a while since she'd been at a friend's house, let alone one she'd only met that week. If she was being honest with herself, she wanted to know more about Izuku. What did he do for fun? What was he interested in? Sure, they'd texted a little bit, which was another mystery to her, but this was only the second time they'd been in each other's presence. Hagakure? The boy's voice broke through her internal dialogue. Is everything okay? Why yeah, she stammered, a little embarrassed at having spaced out. Stepping through the doorway, she slipped off her shoes as well, laying them next to Izuku's. Toru followed her friend through the apartment to the small living room, giggling at the sight of the black, white, and red nameplate over his door. I'm guessing you're a big All Might fan? Izuku's face flushed a little as he broke into a broad grin. Yeah. She's the best. I used to want to be a hero just like her. It took a moment for the meaning of his words to register. You used to? Is it because? The boy's smile faltered slightly and he rubbed the back of his head, fingers seeming to linger. Why, ever since I can remember, I've wanted to be a hero. The sadness in his words tugged at her heart. But being blind kinda makes that a little strong, and being quirkless doesn't make it any better. Midoriya, have you always been blind? He shook his head and finally the weight of the whole situation registered to the girl. Something had all but shattered his dream. He had obviously known his quirklessness was a huge hurdle, but now it was impossible. It happened when I was 4. Toru turned back to her friend. His smile was still there, but it was tinged with sadness. We were just playing by the creek when Kaken slipped off the bridge and into the creek. The smile slowly faded as he stared down at his hands. I was worried about him, so I ran down. Then I slipped and hit my head. When I woke up, he waved his hands in front of his eyes where she could see tears forming. She felt Izuku jump slightly as her hand rested on his shoulder. How do I even respond to that? Toru stared at her own hand, or rather the bracelet she wore. There has to be something I can say. Awkward silence fell between the two middle schoolers for a few moments before Izuku moved. He rubbed away his tears and put on a smile, turning back to his friend. I'm sorry to just dump stuff on you like that. Toru smiled and squeezed his shoulder before removing her hand. Anytime. I mean, what are friends for? As the boy's face brightened, an idea struck her. You know, there are more ways to be a hero than fighting villains and saving lives. Izuku's eyes widened at the words, and over his shoulder she could see Inko, tears in her eyes and a broad smile on her face. I'm sure, in your own way, you'll be an amazing hero. His tears returned, full of happiness this time. As simple as dinner was, Toru was convinced she'd never tasted better katsudon in her life. Obviously, it was a dish Ms. Midoriya had mstread and one that Izuku loved. The conversation was comfortable as well, with Inko wanting to know all about her son's new friend. But aside from the delicious food, the joking, and getting to know the family, the thing that stood out to Toru the most through the whole evening was the feel of it all. It felt like home. "Thank you again for joining us, Toru," Inko called from the dining room. "Feel free to come by any time." The girl smiled and waved as she followed Izuku out the door. He'd insisted on at least walking her out of the complex. Silence settled between the two as they descended the stairs slowly. The greenette obviously had something he wanted to say, so Toru just waited, knowing he preferred thinking things over. Pause. "Did you mean it?" Toru tilted her head. "Did I mean what?" Izuku shook his head, gazing into the distance as he used his hands to guide himself. "What you said earlier, about me being a hero." Her brow furrowed. "Of course I meant it. Why would I lie about something like that?" A sad smile formed on the boy's face. "It's just, why you're the first person to really say that?" His eyes turned downwards as they turned a corner in the complex. "Everyone else?" Toru hummed in understanding. "They tell you it's too dangerous. That your blindness will just get in the way?" He nodded. "And that's why I said what I did. You may not be just like All Might, but you'll be your own kind of hero. Hell, you've helped me already?" Izuku's eyes seemed to light up before his smile grew. Thank you, Hagakure. You just gave me a great idea." Oh, not quite what Toru expected, but it was still a good reaction. "And what would that be?" He turned his head back in the direction they were walking. "I'll tell you about it if it works." "Now that's just mean," the girl pouted. "You can't just say something like that and not tell me." Izuku fidgeted nervously. Obviously he wanted to say what he was thinking, but I kinda wanted to be a surprise. His eyes turned towards her. But I'll tell you this much, I may be getting better." Toru pet her head in confusion, not quite sure what he meant. "What do you?" Her voice trailed off and her eyes widened, hands moving to cover her mouth. "Are you?" Izuku's smile only grew. "It's not for certain, but maybe?" An excited squeal echoed through the complex as Toru threw her arms around her friend, pulling him into a tight embrace. "That's so amazing!" After a few moments she pulled back, seeing the green-haired boy doing a spectacular impression of a tomato, causing her to giggle lightly. "Seriously, that's super exciting news. You have to give the specifics soon, okay?" The boy nodded, still a little dazed at the sudden hug. It even took him a moment to realize they'd reached the entrance to the apartment complex. "I'll be sure to tell why he stammered. "Why, you sure you don't want me to walk you the rest of the way?" Toru nodded, bouncing slightly for emphasis. "Yep. I'll be fine from here. I only live a few blocks away actually." As she made her way out she called back, "Tell your mom thank you again for me." Izuku just waved in response before turning and making his way back up the stairs. The sun had set about an hour before she left Izuku's apartment, the last remnants of its light staining the sky a vivid mix of reds, blues, and purples. Toru gave herself a moment to take in the view before letting out a sigh and making her way home. On the one hand, it was comforting having a new friend who lived so close by. On the other hand, she wished the walk home would take longer. Because within minutes, she arrived at her neighborhood. Her pace slowed as she padded down the sidewalk, gripping the straps of her backpack tight. In her head, her thoughts were racing. "It's okay, Toru. It's just your house. Maybe no one's home yet. Maybe they're asleep. Maybe Dad's still at work. Yeah, that's probably it. The car isn't in the driveway." The gate squeaked lightly as she pushed through it, dragging her feet the last few meters to the front door. With a deep breath, she turned the handle and stepped inside. The only light on was coming from the kitchen, but she couldn't hear anyone. With her shoes removed, she quietly made her way down the hall to investigate. Toru's mother sat at the table, head down and snoring lightly, with a mostly empty wine glass just inches from her hand. With a sigh and a sad smile, Toru tiptoed to the living room, grabbing a blanket. Once she'd wrapped the cloth over her sleeping mother, she stepped silently up the stairs to her room and, once free of her clothes, flopped down onto her mattress. She fell asleep well before the shouting started. The moment the alarm rang through his consciousness, Izuku knew something had changed. It wasn't a sudden change by any means. It had been going on for over 8 years now. But today, he saw it all. Izuku sat bolt upright, trying to take it all in. His hand reached out, flicking the SWs on his clock without fail. Head spinning, he stumbled to his bathroom door. Shapes and outlines filled his senses as he stepped into the small space. He reached out yet again towards one, eyes widening as he gripped his toothbrush without any fumbling or searching. His voice was raspy, throat dry. Swallowing, he tried again. Footsteps in the hall, then the bedroom door opened behind him. He could see it move. Izuku? Honey, is everything all right? Worry tinted his mother's voice as she looked him over. Watch. His voice shook as he reached out, hand landing on his tube of toothpaste. Inko's jaw dropped as she watched her son open the lid and, after turning on the sink and wetting the bristles of the brush, spread the toothpaste on with unerring accuracy. "Oh, Izuku," she whispered, pulling her son into her arms, tears flowing down her cheeks. "Izuku, this is amazing." He smiled brighter than he had in years. It'll work. My idea, it'll actually work." The two held each other close, smiling at this revelation until it was time for Izuku to leave for school. The walk to school that morning was an interesting one. As expected, the explosive blonde took the news of Izuku's new brand of sight with a bit of skepticism. That is, until the blind boy was able to not only avoid walking into a signpost, but did so without also walking into one of the sidewalk's other travelers. You're still blind, right?" Katsuki asked after the fourth such incident, this one involving a lady with a baby stroller. As a bat. A bright grin grew on Izuku's face as he realized the truth of his statement. Katsuki couldn't help but smile inwardly, the ever-present shadow of guilt lifting slightly at the revelation that his friend was getting better. A small hand landed on his shoulder, causing the boy to jump slightly, though he'd never admit it out loud. Izuku's smile had turned soft, becoming one of understanding. I've forgiven you for that, Kaken," the smaller boy said, voice barely louder than a whisper as they entered the school. "I just hope you can forgive yourself one day." Katsuki sighed, patting his friend's shoulder in return. "Maybe one day?" The last bell couldn't come soon enough. It never did on days like this. As much as Toru appreciated the company of her friends, sometimes being alone was better. "Dad, 1342, hey sweetie. Mom and I have an appointment we have to go to after work. We left some money on the table for food." "Dad, 1343, I'm sorry for leaving you alone again today. Hopefully this will all be figured out soon." "Dad, 1343, I love you, my little ghost." "Me, 1506, I love you too, Daddy. Hope things go well." Shutting her phone and pocketing it, Toru swung her bag over her shoulder and headed towards the gate. Not 3 seconds later, she felt her phone go off once again. As she reached for it, however, a voice got her attention. "Toru, wait up." The invisible girl turned. "Hey Maki. What's up?" Maki slowed to a walk as she neared her friend, smiling amiably. "Oh, nothing," the girl hummed. "Just wondered if you wanted to come over today. Maybe give me a hand with some of the homework." Toru giggled, knowing her friend would likely need a good amount of help considering how distracted she'd been the last few days. "I'd love to help," she said, bouncing slightly, "but I can't today." Seeing the crestfallen look on Maki's face, she quickly added, I promised a friend I'd help him with something." Maki's frown was quickly replaced by a mischievous grin. "Him, huh?" Toru groaned, regretting her explanation. "Is this someone I know?" She was stuck. If she denied what she said, it would only heighten her friend's curiosity, but telling her any more would just give her fuel for gossip. With a sigh, Toru resigned herself to her fate. "He's just a friend, Maki. I only met him last week." She saw Maki's eyes gleam, and it gave her an evil idea. "Besides, you already know who I like." With a grin of her own, the invisible girl turned and started walking away. "Wait," Maki yelled from behind her. "You never told me you liked someone. I have to know how." Toru just giggled and waved, quickening her pace slightly. The park was mostly empty today, as it usually was on a Monday. It didn't take long for Toru to find an unoccupied bench, which she quickly sprawled out on, using her backpack as a pillow. It wasn't until she had made herself completely comfortable that she remembered her phone and the unread message. Midori Bean, 1507, it's working. The girl sat bolt upright, fingers flying over her screen. Me, 1537, what? Seriously? Her heart was racing. Sure, she'd only known the boy for a week now. But with the amount they had been texting each other, not to mention dinner the day before, Toru already considered him a close friend and couldn't help but be excited for him. It took the boy a few minutes to respond, and she could feel her curiosity growing with each passing moment. Midori Bean, 1541, yeah. I'm down at Dagoba Municipal Beach if you want to come by. Midori Bean, 1542, not that you have to come if you don't want to, I just thought with how cryptic I was about it all yesterday that you may want to know what I was talking about. Why? Midori Bean, 1542, Ori probably busy with stuff and wouldn't be able to come see anyway, plus we've only known each other for a week now, so it may be weird of me asking, so I comp. Midori Bean, 1542, Leetly understand if you don't want to come. Toru burst into laughter. In the few times they'd interacted in person or talked over the phone, she'd heard the green-haired boy's mumbling habit come into play more than once. This was, however, the first time she'd seen it in text form, and frankly she was impressed that his phone could pick it all up. Me, 1544, don't sweat it, Midoriya. I'd love to see what you can do. Smiley face. After a few minutes of soaking up more of the summer sun, the invisible girl swung her bag back onto her shoulder and made her way. New message from Hagakure. Hagakure, 1544, don't sweat it, Midoriya. I'd love to see what you can do. Smiley face. Izuku couldn't help but smile at his friend's words as he pocketed his phone. He could only guess she was at the park, which meant he had at least 10 minutes before she would get there. Plenty of time to practice his sight a bit more. This stretch of beach presented a perfect opportunity for Izuku to practice for multiple reasons. The random objects scattered across the sand would let him familiarize himself with how sounds interacted differently with certain materials. This would help him hone his vision more and more as he navigated the mountains of trash. More than this, however, was the idea that his new friend had put in his mind. I'm sure, in your own way, you'll be an amazing hero. Those words had meant more to him than she could ever know. He still wanted to be a hero, even after all these years. And what better way to be a hero than to help people? So, he determined, Izuku would use his time training at the beach to clean it. There was a dumpster here already, so he didn't need to worry about having a place to dispose of the trash. He just hoped he could train his senses to keep from hurting himself on the various objects. After a few minutes of searching, he found what he'd been looking for. Reaching down, he picked up what he assumed was an old plastic paint bucket, feeling around the inside to get a better idea of its integrity and dimensions. Once he was sure it wouldn't break on him too quickly, Izuku was ready. Midoriya? The voice was muffled slightly by the trash surrounding him, but he recognized it all the same. Over here, Hagakure. A moment later, the sound of footsteps in the sand filled the air, bringing more of the trash into view for the green-haired boy. Holy hell, this place is a mess. Izuku chuckled at her words, nodding in agreement as he dropped a few smaller items of the trash into his bucket. He could feel her eyes on him as he worked. There was a minute of silence before she cleared her throat. So, are you gonna tell me now? Without a word, the boy stood and turned so he was directly facing his friend. A look of concentration formed on his face as he clicked his tongue twice, listening intently for the echoes that formed the world around him. Then, still facing his friend, he tossed the small object in his hand towards the bucket he'd set on the ground. Toru watched as the remote her friend had tossed clattered against the rim of the bucket before falling to the sand. Damn it, the boy muttered under his breath. I'm gonna need to work on that some more. Her eyes slowly widened as she realized what had just happened, pieced together with his words from the day before. Yeah, you just... A grin stretched across her friend's face as she fumbled for the right words. You could not see the bucket? Izuku nodded. Technically, I could hear it. But yeah. The grin turned into a blinding smile, tears welling in his emerald eyes. You were right, Hagakure. I'm going to be my own kind of hero. The creaking of floorboards broke through the silence in the house as Toru padded her way into the kitchen, the light of the low-hanging sun streaming through the window. Normally she and Izuku would still be training his new vision down at the beach, but with the new term starting tomorrow, the girl was home early. Her dad was home early today as well, though he was holed up in his office for the time being. Through the thin sliding door, Toru could hear the ringing of her dad's cell, followed by the sound of papers shifting. Curiosity got the better of her and she crept forward, drink in hand. "Hello." "Yes, this is he." "Good afternoon, officer. What can I do for you?" "Is everything okay? What happened this time?" A heavy sigh. "I understand. I'll be there in a few minutes." "Yes, thank you, officer." "Same here. Goodbye." Toru almost spilled her drink as she backpedaled into the kitchen, hearing her father's footsteps nearing the door before he opened it. He looked even more tired than usual as he rubbed his eyes, shaking his head slowly. "You okay, Daddy?" the girl asked, a hint of concern in her voice. "Is everything all right?" Kaido sighed, giving his daughter a soft smile. "I'll be fine, sweetie," the man replied, stepping to the fridge and pouring himself a glass of water. "Daddy has to run down to the station for a bit." The invisible girl felt her heart sink at the words, knowing exactly what they entailed. Do you need me to come with you this time?" Her father chuckled lightly. "No, sorry." His arm wrapped around her, pulling her head into his ear. She hugged him back, letting herself relax in his comforting embrace. "The officers said they had some things to go over, so hopefully things will get worked out." Toru simply nodded. Her dad squeezed her again lightly before leaving a soft embrace on the top of her head. She squeezed back, then pulled away. In a few minutes, the front door closed behind the older Hagakure, leaving Toru alone with her worries. The glass double doors of the police station slid open as Hagakure Kaito approached them, granting him passage into the brightly lit entryway. The officer at the front desk looked up from his monitor at the sound. "Afternoon. What can we do for you?" The man sighed, pushing his red hair away from his eyes in vain. "Yes, I'm Hagakure Kaito. I received a call from Officer Hayakushi." Recognition sparked in the younger officer's eyes. Yes, I remember hearing about that." He gestured towards the chairs along the wall. "If you'd take a seat, I'll let her know you're here." With a quick bow, Kaito turned and took a seat, watching the officer disappear through the door behind him. It only took a minute or two before a familiar face appeared through the doorway, giving the man a soft smile and motioning for him to follow. "I'm sorry about the short notice," the officer began as the two walked towards her office. "As you know, this is not the first time something like this has happened." The man nodded but said nothing. Knowing what she was going to say next didn't quell the weight of dread he carried with him. This time, though, the officer leaned forward, holding out a small stack of papers for Kaito, which he took carefully. His hands shook slightly as he scanned the documents. It wasn't the first time he'd read through these particular words, but it was the first time the pages had been marked with an official seal. Hayakushi studied him for a moment before giving him a sad sigh. "I can understand how strong this will be for you and your daughter," she said as the man handed the papers back, wiping a tear from his eye. "But at this point, we have no other choice but to admit your wife to a rehab facility, as per the agreed arrangement from the last hearing." Kaito nodded in understanding. "It's fine, officer." His voice shook ever so slightly. "It's that it's been a long time coming at this point." He shifted his gaze from his hands towards the window. "You know, she's been upset with me for a long time now." The officer tilted her head. "What do you mean?" she asked. A sad smile spread briefly across the man's face. "I've not had to work extra hours recently. I'm the head electronics guy at Midoriyas support, and being short-staffed means later nights for me." He rubbed his face tiredly. About a month after, the drinking started. Something seemed to click in Hayakushi's mind. "So she thinks you're seeing someone?" The man nodded. "She's confronted me about it a few times. Usually drunk." Sighing, Kaito turned back to the officer, the sad smile back on. "But it's no use worrying about it now, is it?" Hayakushi nodded with a mix of agreement and understanding. "I sincerely hope the rehab will help her see things more clearly." She then stood, gesturing for the Hagakure patriarch to do the same. For now, I'll have to ask you to take her home and have her pack some necessities. Officers Sugoroku and Mitsuba will be by tomorrow morning to pick her up. Kaito bowed. I understand, officer. I'll make sure everything is ready by then. The lady patted his shoulder sympathetically when he straightened, then followed him to the holding area to find his wife. The walk down the hall seemed to stretch as the man braced himself for the tirade he knew would come. The officer opened the door and ushered him through, following across the threshold. Upon rounding a corner, Kaito found himself face to face with his wife. There was a brief moment of silence before the shouting began anew. Headlights shone through the window briefly as her dad's car pulled into the driveway. Toru quickly ran to her doorway, peeking through as she heard the front door open. She watched as her mom stumbled through the kitchen towards the bedroom, obviously still a little drunk. A minute later, her father came into view, his gaze downcast as he slowly removed his shoes before stepping into the living room and taking a seat on the couch. The hunched shoulders and twisting hands betrayed the worried state of his mind. Before she could stop herself, the young girl was moving to her father's side, lowering herself onto the couch next to him and resting a hand on his shoulder. She could feel him tense briefly at the contact before relaxing and dropping his face into his hands. Daddy? Her voice was soft, little more than a whisper. Her dad took a deep, shaky breath before turning to her. She could see him holding back tears as he turned his gaze to her. The sight made her breath catch in her throat. Is Darius mom? Kaito shook his head slowly before pulling the girl into a tight embrace. It'll be okay, sweetie. It'll be okay. Somehow, Toru knew the words weren't just for her. Deku, move your butt. Only the second week of the term and you're already gonna make us late? While he could barely see more than an outline of his explosive friend at this distance, Izuku was almost certain Katsuki was wearing his signature scowl. He ran his hand over his braille watch, making sure they wouldn't actually be late, but jogged to reach his friend nonetheless. Sorry, Kaken, Izuku said, hiding his grin at the blonde's impatience. Katsuki just huffed. Whatever, nerd. Just gotta make sure you don't fall on your butt 1,000 times and slow us both down. Not likely, considering my uncanny spatial awareness, the green-haired boy teased. He could almost feel Katsuki's eye roll. Does Kaken still think I'm lying about my new sight? The rest of the walk was spent mostly in silence, which allowed Izuku to realize more and more how much his training was paying off. His hearing had been getting stronger and more refined, giving him an increased field of view. He was able to differentiate more and more between different sounds, though it was still strong to filter things out. Half an hour passed by in a flash, and soon the boys found themselves at the front gate to their school. As they entered the building, Izuku could hear a familiar voice echoing from down the hall in the direction of the principal's office. The hell? Why'd you stop, Deku? Kaken's voice pulled him from his temporary confusion. Oh, nothing. I just thought I heard that someone I know. He shook his head. It couldn't have been, though. Katsuki huffed again. Come on. Get your butt moving again or else we'll both be late. With a nod, Izuku hurried up the stairs after his friend, racing to their classroom as fast as possible without outright running there. The two boys took their seats, relieved to find they weren't the last ones to arrive. Alright class. Settle down, their teacher, Mrs. Kawahara, called from the front of the room. We've got a busy day ahead of us, so we need to get started right away. Izuku and Katsuki stole a glance at each other. True to form, both of them had spent the weekend working ahead in each of their classes, so they weren't too worried about the contents of today's lessons. Mrs. Kawahara moved towards the door. Before we begin our lesson for the day, we have a new student who will be joining us starting today. The door slid open, and a familiar outline stepped through. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Izuku sat bolt upright. He knew his ears hadn't been playing tricks on him earlier. Okay, the invisible girl said, uncharacteristically nervous. The green-haired boy could swear he could hear her heart racing. I am Hagakure Toru. I'm really excited to get to know you all. Thank you for letting me join your class. We're happy to have you, dear, their teacher said, her smile brightening her already cheerful voice. Why don't you go take that seat by Midoriya in the back? So that's why there was that empty desk there, Izuku thought, rubbing his newly bruised knee. He smiled at Toru as she took her seat, which she returned. "I'll explain at lunch," she whispered, noticing the curious look on the boy's face. He simply nodded in reply before turning his attention back to the lesson. "So, the moving truck over the weekend?" Izuku started, tilting his head in contemplation. Toru nodded in reply, forgetting that the blonde boy couldn't see the motion. With him present, his name's Bakugu or something, right? The invisible girl hadn't felt comfortable telling the full story, opting for a watered-down version. She'd have to explain more to her friend later. "Still doesn't explain how the hell you know Deku in the first place," the blonde huffed. Confusion crossed Toru's face briefly before she realized who the boy meant. "Oh, Midoriya? Well, She shrugged in embarrassment. "I kinda ran into him one day." Literally, the green-haired kid snorted. "She offered to help me look for my phone after I realized I'd left it at the park last spring." He shrugged before adding, "We've just kinda been talking ever since." Bakugu chuckled softly. "For all those brains you got, you still keep forgetting sheet? Guess Deku still fits you then. I'll have you know, I've only lost one notebook this week," Izuku stated with mock indignance, the sight causing Toru to giggle uncontrollably. Bakugu simply rolled his eyes but kept quiet. The rest of the school day flew by. Toru had been extremely nervous that morning, afraid this would be a repeat of her first day of junior high. Looking back, she knew the constant questions about her appearance were, for the most part, brought about by genuine curiosity, but that didn't make them hurt any less. A person could only handle so many jokes about being invisible before wondering if they really were jokes. But that had quickly changed when she saw who one of her classmates was. She knew Izuku wouldn't judge her for her looks, or lack thereof, and after lunch she knew Bakugu would be the same, if you ignore the fact that he called her Invisalign instead of her actual name. Not only that, but knowing at least one person in the class had greatly reduced the stress of friend-making. Now that the day was over, the girl had a new demon to face. A new walk home with an empty, unfamiliar apartment as the destination. Anyone who knew her predicament would hardly fault her for dragging her feet in collecting her belongings. "So I guess we'll be walking home together." Toru's head whipped around, looking at her green-haired friend as though he'd just grown a third head. Two heads were still rare, but not unheard of in the world of quirks. After a moment of staring, the reality of the boy's words clicked in her head. "Oh yeah, I guess you're right." She gave a relieved sigh at the reminder that her now best friend lived merely a few doors away. Silence fell between the two as they made their way out the front gate. After bidding farewell to the blonde Bakugu, "I gotta remember that," the boy turned towards her, rubbing the back of his head. "I was planning to stop by the beach before heading home. Why, you can join me if you want. That is, unless you have to be home or have other people to spend time with." "I meant I can't just?" The girl couldn't help but giggle lightly as her friend's words devolved into nearly incoherent muttering, to the point where she had to shake him gently to get him to stop. "It's fine," she said with a smile. "I'd actually really appreciate that." Izuku tilted his head, as though he wasn't quite sure what to think about her words. "What? Is everything okay?" Toru paused for a minute before slowly shaking her head, trying in vain to keep the lump from forming in her throat. "I'll explain while we walk." 12 years of life had not prepared him for this moment. No textbook, video game, or hero fight could have prepared him. It definitely didn't help that he'd never imagined himself being in this situation, especially since Toru was his first real female friend. So naturally, when the crying girl had buried her face into his shoulder, he froze and let out a very eloquent string of incoherent noises. He was sure he hadn't done anything wrong up until this point. This just meant she trusted him, right? She wouldn't have told him about her mom if she didn't. But that didn't change the reality that there was now a girl crying in his shoulder. "Why no, my dad's gone too." "What the hell, Izuku? Now is not the time. My mom and we've been on our own for a couple of years now." He could feel her grip tighten on his shirt. "Shut up. We still get money from him every month, and that helps. But it's been so long that I can't even remember what he looks like." The girl's shaking slowly subsided, but he could tell she was still crying. Deciding he'd dug himself in too deep already, the boy decided to continue. "It hit my mom the hardest. She doesn't know it, but I've heard her cry about it a lot when she thinks I'm asleep. Okay, now to find a way to make this relevant. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think I have some idea what you're going through. Good. That's perfect. Now just stop there. I mean, not really, since I was so young at the time that him leaving didn't really affect me too much, but I know what my mom is going through, so I have some idea. Way to go, De. You were on a roll and you blew it. Brilliant. Absolutely foo. Thank you. Toru's voice was soft, barely louder than a whisper, but it cut through Izuku's thoughts with ease. Slowly, she pulled away, loosening her hold on the boy's shirt. I've never really had anyone I could talk to L like this. The words tore at Izuku's heart more than anything else the girl had said that day. It was something he could relate to on a whole other level. I know that feeling all too well, he muttered, then paused. Wait, did you not have friends? At your old school, I mean? I did, she answered with what the boy assumed as a sad smile, wiping a few stray tears from her cheeks. I was friends with most of the girls in my year. Most of them were just into gossip and romance and cute things. We never had any deep conversations. A sigh escaped her lips. I guess I just never felt I could confide in them. About anything, really. Izuku nearly patted her shoulder in comfort again, but held himself back, not wanting a repeat of what had just occurred. Instead, he decided to take another risk. God, this is gonna sound weird, but if you had had someone to confide in, what would you have told them? The smile he felt forming on his friend's face immediately made him wish he could take back his words. Wow, Midoriya. Pretty bold asking a girl to share all her dark secrets. Yes, Death? This is Midoriya Izuku. You can pick me up whenever you'd like. She giggled at what he imagined was his tomato-red face. It's fine. I'm just teasing. There was a pause while she turned away, tracing her finger idly through the sand. I guess it would have been nice to just talk, you know? To vent out insecurities and stuff? The boy tilted his head in confusion. You're insecure? You're sure good at hiding it if that's the case? The pause. You know how there's the stereotype of girls obsessing over looks? Their own as well as others? Izuku nodded. Well, it's a stereotype for a reason. Most girls I know are that way. Especially some of my friends at Nebo Academy. Makeup, hairstyles, accessories, you name it. He could hear the shakiness in her breath as she sighed. It must have been strong for you to relate, he interjected softly. She nodded before continuing. Most days, one or two of the girls would try out a different look. Sometimes it was to get the attention of some boy, other times they just wanted to feel pretty. Izuku heard a single tear trace a path down her jaw. It's strong. To feel confident about yourself. When no one sees you. For the first time in years, Toru felt truly at ease. At home, the atmosphere between her parents had almost always been tense, and she'd hid her own concerns to avoid adding to their stress. At school she would put on a bit of an act, wanting to fit in more with the other girls and not take away from their excitement and enthusiasm. But here, on a trash-covered beach with a green-haired boy she'd known for only a few months, she'd been able to let down her guard and open up. Not only had she shared some of her deepest insecurities with him, but he was even able to relate to most of them. Do you have any idea how many times I went to school smelling like bug spray instead of Old Spice? Never before had she been able to just talk and laugh openly with a friend. It was truly refreshing. You know, Izuku's voice pulled her back to the present. It's getting pretty late now. We should probably get home so we can finish up our homework. Toru nodded. Yeah, Dad's probably wondering why I'm not at the apartment yet. She saw the boy stiffen at her correction as she pulled out her phone. A quick text later and she turned back to her friend. Neither moved for a few minutes, simply staring out at the hypnotic ebb and flow of the waves. Hey, Midoriya? Toru broke the silence. Thank you. She turned, smiling at him. It wasn't a bright, toothy smile, but a soft and simple one. Thank you for being my friend. The boy smiled back at her, meeting her eyes perfectly. I'm glad I can be your friend, Hagakure. Call me Toru. The words escaped her lips before she could stop herself, though she didn't regret them at all. Izuku simply squeezed her hand in response. Wait, when did he? By the time Toru made it to her new bedroom and closed the door behind her, Any anxiety she'd felt at being home alone was all but forgotten. The walk home from the beach had been nerve-wracking, yes, but in a completely different and unexpected way. The silence in the room lasted nearly a full minute before being shattered completely when the girl threw herself onto her bed and screamed into her pillow. Questions rampaged through her mind as she reflected on the past few hours. She was almost 100% certain that things could not have gone any worse. I mean, it's not like you embraced him or anything, she reminded herself mentally. Who knows how that would have turned out? A groan echoed through the small room as Toru extracted herself from the pillow and flopped onto her back. Where did that come from? Up until today, the mere idea of embracing Izuku had never crossed her mind. She couldn't be in a relationship with him. They were just friends, right? I don't even know if he sees me that way. Do I see him that way? Ugh, why is my brain doing this to me? Her scream of frustration was again muffled by the pillow she pulled over her face. He held your hand. Her groans of frustration stopped. Toru threw the pillow off of her as she stared up at the ceiling, eyes wide. He held my hand, she whispered, moving that same hand up in front of her face, inspecting it. Was that on purpose? The memory of that moment, when he looked her in the eye and smiled at her, flashed through her mind. They had both looked down at the same time, seeing their hands together. He'd looked just as surprised as she'd felt. A new, worse thought wormed its way into her mind. What if it was me? Did I grab his hand? She flopped onto her back again and yelled out the only conclusion she could come to. Feelings, SEK. School the next day had to be cancelled, as a nearby villain fight had wrecked most of the roads in the vicinity. Izuku had wasted no time in asking his mom to help him find a radio station recap of the attack. Turns out the villain had a pressure-related quirk, and had caused many underground pipes to burst before Edgeshot and Best Jeanist were able to subdue her. The good thing about radio recaps was how much detail they would add in the description. It was almost as good as being able to see the fight itself. Unfortunately, the green-haired boy had a lot more on his mind than just a cool new quirk to write about. Izuku, honey, is something wrong? The boy realized he'd been staring off into space for a good few minutes. Without muttering, "Oh, sorry Mom. I'm fine." He pulled himself back to the present. "I was just thinking about yesterday." The older Midoriya tilted her head at that. "That's right. You told me that Hagakure girl is in your class now." She paused briefly then asked, "Did her family just move or something?" Izuku hummed, trying to decide how much information would be okay to share with his mom. They lived pretty close already, but they had some changes recently. Had to downsize a bit? Inko nodded in understanding. Izuku figured she'd caught on to the tone of his voice and that she wouldn't press the issue further. "I bet that's nice though. It means you'll get to see your friend more often now." "That's true," he replied, pushing his seat back from the table and carrying his breakfast plate to the sink. "You don't mind if I head to the beach, do you? I wanted to test some things out with my hearing." His mother's smile echoed brightly in her voice. "Of course. Oh, I'm so happy that this all has been working out. Just remember to be home before it gets too late, and text me every once in a while so I know you're all right." With a smile, a hug, and a promise, Izuku loaded up his backpack with a few water bottles and made his way out the door. Once alone, he allowed his repressed thoughts to come flooding back. His mother's words about seeing Hagakure more often had brought the memory of the previous evening back to his mind in full force. While overall his thoughts and emotions were in turmoil because of the whole encounter, he knew one thing for certain. He had helped her. She'd said so herself when they parted ways for the evening, and those words had echoed in his mind for hours before his exhaustion dragged him into unconsciousness. "Thank you for helping me." He closed his eyes, letting his feet carry him as his mind wandered to yet another memory from that evening. Perhaps the moment that had surprised him the most. Finding her hand in his. Did I do that? Or did she grab my hand? His heart skipped a beat at the possibility before he mentally slapped himself. "Come on, Dad. There's no way. She's a pretty girl and she obviously only sees you as a friend." The events played over and over in his mind, up until he felt the familiar sliding sensation of his feet moving through sand. No matter how much his doubts and insecurities raged within him, There was now one more certainty in his life. I like Toru. Her hand slid over the railing as she made her way down the pathway beside the ruined beach. This had always been one of her favorite places when she was younger, and even now with heaps of trash covering the sand, it still felt the same as it always did. The lady took a deep breath, letting the smell of warm sand and ocean water fill her. She couldn't help the smile forming as she swung her legs over the brick wall. It had been far too long since she'd visited her little refuge, and she intended to take full advantage of the beach's abandoned status. Only, it obviously wasn't abandoned. Incessant muttering is not something a person hears at a place that is abandoned. Who the hell? Her curiosity didn't last very long, as within just a few moments of her arrival she spotted a short, green-haired boy making his way in between the heaps of debris. A kid? What the hell is a kid doing here? Curiosity returned in a different form as she watched the boy. The dark-haired woman couldn't make out anything he was saying, but it was easy to see he was completely oblivious to the world around him. After a few minutes of being watched, the boy made his way to the most open area of shoreline. The area which just so happened to be directly in front of the woman. She decided to wait for him to notice her before speaking. Wow, kid, do you have a breathing quirk or something? Izuku's head shot up at the unfamiliar voice, a deep crimson blush flooding his cheeks. How long has she been there? He wondered to himself. And what? I don't think I've ever heard someone talk so fast for so long before. That explains it. And no, I don't. I just talk to myself a lot. She nodded in understanding but said nothing. The boy hesitated for a bit before his own curiosity got the better of him. And not to be rude, but I didn't really think anyone else came to this beach. The lady chuckled briefly. I was gonna say the same thing, she said, ending with a brief cough. I came here all the time when I was younger and thought it was about time I visited. I wasn't expecting anyone else to be here either. Izuku simply shrugged. It's a nice place to come when you want to be alone, he replied. Plus, all the trash around makes for good weight training. You know, the lady said, a hint of amusement in her voice. I was actually wondering about that. I noticed a lot of these piles were much smaller than the pictures. That was you? The green-haired boy shifted his weight from foot to foot, almost embarrassed. Why? His head tilted at the question. Wasn't expecting that. I bet it's a bit of a long story. I got time. Izuku pet an eyebrow. My apologies, but why do you want to know? The woman smiled and sighed, moving to sit on the sand, her back to the wall. That's a fair question. I guess I'm just curious. Most kids your age wouldn't be doing stuff like this, so I wonder why you are. Most kids my age aren't in my situation, he muttered loudly, sitting as well and starting some stretches. The lady pet her head but said nothing. Being quirkless certainly doesn't do you many favors nowadays. He saw the slight twinge that crossed the lady's face at those words. You're not wrong there, she stated. I bet it's easy to feel like you're pretty far behind everyone else, huh? You can say that again. Another twinge, but one that was quickly replaced with a broad smile. Seems like you're definitely on the right track though. The pause. Can I ask another question? The boy nodded. What do you want to be when you're older? A hero. The words were out of his mouth without a thought. I've always wanted to be a hero just like All Might. It's just... Izuku's voice trailed off, and he could feel the woman staring, waiting for him to continue. It's not possible. Because you're quirkless? He shook his head. It's because I'm quirkless and blind. Heroes come in quite literally, all shapes and sizes. There are heroes with voice quirks, elemental quirks, speed quirks. There are heroes who can transform, heroes who can fly, heroes with the heads of different animals. There's even a hero that can erase other quirks. But there is one thing that no hero, past or present, has ever been: blind. It was for this very reason that Shimura Nana found herself more conflicted than she ever had been before. She knew she needed to retire. The large scar in her side made that painfully obvious. To do that, however, she needed to find a successor for her quirk. Someone with the heart of a hero and a drive to help people. Of course, there were many promising up-and-coming heroes who would make for great successors. Some she suspected already had the strength needed to handle the power of One for All. But for each of these prospects, something felt like it had been missing. Now she knew what that something was. It was something she'd seen too little of, and something she tried strong to emulate. True conviction. She didn't doubt the hearts of the heroes she worked alongside. Well, maybe with one exception. She knew they tried their hardest to save people and wanted to make the cities they patrolled a safer place. But to what end? With this young, green-haired child, she knew the answer. There was no doubt in her mind that his boy would do anything in his power to help someone in need. The more she thought about it, the more she realized the truth. There was only one conclusion. He's the one. It was a gradual change, so much so that Izuku barely even noticed it. It wasn't until he and Toru stopped for a break one afternoon that she pointed it out to him. "So, I know you said you were making progress on the beach," she stated between bites of sandwich, "but you dragging that fridge was definitely not what I expected." Izuku blushed at the sort of compliment, looking intently at the sand between his legs. I've kinda been getting a few pointers recently." The girl pet her head at this. "Oh, who from?" "There's a lady who comes here every once in a while. She said she used to do a lot of heavy lifting and strength training." The boy laid back, resting his head on his hands as he gazed up at the fall sky. Apparently this place was super popular when she was younger. "You don't say?" He felt the sand shift as Toru twisted a little, looking out over the ocean. "I can definitely see why." There was a pause as she seemed to get lost in thought for a moment. "Wait, why is she helping you?" "Not that it's not awesome or anything. It just got kinda strange." Izuku had wondered the same thing himself. He'd even asked Ms. Shimura why during one of their impromptu training sessions. "Apparently she doesn't want me to mess myself up while moving any of this stuff," he finally answered. "It seems like there's more to it than just that, but I'm not gonna say no to free help." The girl nodded, seeming to accept the answer to about the same level Izuku had. Silence fell between the two as they listened to the ocean. He could feel her eyes on her and knew she must be thinking strong at the way she worried at her lip. As curious as he was, the boy decided to simply close his eyes and smile. "Then, that was a lot easier than I thought it was gonna be. Maybe for you, Ms. I just transferred from a private school. NABO's curriculum is always a little ahead of ours. Yeah, we had to study our butts off for that final. Wouldn't be surprised if some of the other sheet for brains flat out failed." "Do mine ears deceive me?" Toru gasped in mock surprise. Did the great and powerful Bakugo just admit to not being the best at something? Izuku failed at hiding his grin while Bakugo growled emptily. "Watch it, Invisalign. Just 'cause you done all the sheet before doesn't make you better." "I shall keep that in mind, Sir Explosion King." The girl gave a mock bow, making the blonde huff and roll his eyes. After a few more minutes of mild banter and name-calling, Bakugo bid his two friends farewell to head for his own home. The two remaining teens walked in silence, huddled against the cold December air. Without thinking, Toru's eyes wandered over to the green-haired boy walking beside her. She wondered idly to herself what her life would be like now had they never met. Her mind dragged her back to a time where she would lie awake well after the shouting of her parents had faded to silence. A time where she would cry herself to sleep because of her insecurities. Before, these memories alone could bring her to the verge of tears and beyond. She could hardly remember a time where she didn't feel moments away from breaking down. But now, the memory of each breakdown and sleepless night took her mind somewhere new. Sand beneath her feet. A setting sun behind her. A hand on her shoulder. His voice. "You know," Izuku's voice broke the silence. "I can almost hear you thinking." Toru jolted from her thoughts, feeling her face flush wildly and thanking every deity she knew that Izuku couldn't see color. "Oh, really?" She fumbled for something, anything, to say. I was just thinking about how glad I am that we're effart that I met you." Though the look on his face said he knew she was hiding something, the boy smiled brightly at her. "I'm glad we met too, Toru," he replied. "You've really helped me a lot." I really appreciate that." Impossible though it may have been, Toru felt her blush deepen even more. Wordlessly, she let her gently bump into his side, smiling brightly at him. A moment later, she felt him return the gesture. Nana slumped on the small couch, still stirring in the sugar that had long since dissolved. The elderly hero seated across from her waited patiently as she mulled over her thoughts. I found the one, she stated simply, tensing immediately at what her friend might say. Instead he surprised her. He's got the drive, I assume? Nana looked up with a start before nodding and taking a sip of her tea. Another pause before Gran Torino spoke up again. Well, are you gonna tell me about him, or are we playing 20 questions here? The dark-haired hero couldn't help but snort and grin. You're certainly impatient, she shot back, a twinkle in her eyes. What all do you want to know? Gran chuckled briefly. How old is the kid? He's just finishing his first year of junior high. Nana suppressed a grin at the surprise on her friend's face. I know, that's really young. But he'd surprise you. Gran raised an eyebrow, but before he could say anything, she just kept talking. He started cleaning Dagoba Beach, Gran. A 13-year-old is trying to clean the whole beach because he feels it's the best way he can be a hero. He was not expecting that last part. Wait, what? What do you mean by that? Nana stopped in her tracks. Gazing into her tea, she mumbled, well, he's quirkless? Gran guessed. The lady simply nodded, not lifting her eyes. The older man let out a long sigh, shaking his head in amusement. Not sure why I expected otherwise. And what's that supposed to mean, huh? He held up his hands in defense. Calm down, Nana. We both know you have a soft spot there. With a softer smile he added, guess it probably helps that your predecessor had been quirkless too. She nodded, a smile forming on her face as she downed the rest of her beverage, setting the mug on the small table between them. There was a long moment where she gazed off into space, letting her thoughts wander. It's not just that. Her voice caught the attention of the elderly hero. He's also blind, Gran. Nana quickly raised a hand to stem her friend's protests. Just hear me out, okay? There's more to it. She watched in mild amusement as Gran had to all but physically force himself to sit still. Not that she could blame him. The boy's blind, but I think he can see better than most people. Skepticism crossed his face, but he blessedly kept his mouth shut. I'm not sure exactly how it works, even after he tried explaining it to me. From what I do understand, he basically sees with his ears. Kind of like a type of echolocation quirk. Gran simply nodded, seeming to understand where she was going with her line of thought. So you're kinda hoping One for All will enhance that for him, huh? She nodded. You've seen what it's done for my own quirk, Nana said, activating both quirks and taking on her All Might's form. The age seemed to melt from her features, wrinkles and worry lines vanishing, extra fat melting away. And we already know it enhances physicality. If the boy has been working out his hearing like another muscle, why wouldn't One for All make that stronger as well? After a moment, she let both quirks go. Her age returned and she sat back against the cushions. There was a long pause between the two friends as Nana's thoughts flew back nearly 30 years. A face entered her mind as her old wound began to ache. A face covered in BLD. Gran knew where her mind had gone. You're worried though, aren't you? It was more of a statement and a question. Taking a deep breath in and out, she nodded. Terrified. Another silence filled the room. Are you sure you can go through that again? After what happened with? Nana nodded shakily. Either this kid lives, or we lose One for All. Hey kid. Izuku looked up from his stretches, and Nana could only guess that his attention was on her. He didn't usually look at people. Steeling herself for the conversation to come, she waved him over. Come here for a bit, will ya? The boy must have caught on to the slight shake in her voice, because he hesitated for a moment before standing. Is everything all right, Miss Shimura? He asked, concern tinting his voice. I'm fine, it's just... She took a steadying breath. There's something I gotta tell you. She motioned for him to follow before turning and walking through the piles of trash. After half a minute of walking, they came to what appeared to be an old bench from someone's backyard. Nana seated herself on one end and motioned for her student of sorts to do the same. Are you sure you're okay, Miss Shimura? He asked again. You seem... The boy's words trailed off and he looked away almost bashfully. Nana couldn't help but smile briefly. Like I said, there's something I need to tell you. She sighed deeply, resting her elbows on her knees as she looked out towards the horizon. You've definitely come a long way. A bright smile grew on his face at the praise. Thank you. I don't think I could have gotten this far without your help. Not this fast, what if, and this is gonna be harder than I thought it'd be. What if I told you I could help you go even faster? That caught Izuku's attention fully. Nana raised a hand to cut him off. Before I explain, I have to come clean with you, Midoriya. Using his name had the desired effect. Rarely did she call him anything other than kid or boing or something that poked at his stature. This time, he knew she was dead serious about whatever she was about to say. Nana closed her eyes, face aimed down at the sand. I haven't been entirely truthful with you. You deserve to know who I am. Slowly, she moved closer to the boy, taking his hand and moving it to her face. The boy's face turned to one of confusion as his fingers traced the lines and wrinkles on her brow and cheeks. Then, Nana activated her quirk. Izuku's eyes went wide as he felt the now smooth skin under his hand. The strong line of her jaw, the signature mole on her chin. There wasn't anyone else she could be. Why you're... Yes, Midoriya. I am All Might. By some miracle, Izuku did not enter his usual fanboy mode. She'd seen him ramble endlessly about pro heroes time and time again, and had half expected him to do the same once he found out. But something about her tone, about the way she'd revealed herself, had held his excitement at bay. His voice cracked slightly. Why me? Nana smiled softly at the boy, releasing her quirks but not his hand. Because, my boy, I want to ask you to be my successor. Izuku seemed to stagger under the weight of the heroine's words, eyes growing wide. But I'm quirkless. He nearly choked on the word. I am quirkless, I'm blind, there's no way I could possibly be a hero. There's no way. Tears began to well in his eyes as his words died in his throat. I can't. You can. Nana's hand rested on the boy's shoulder in a comforting manner. He rubbed the tears from his eyes as he turned to face her again. You can be a hero. And I will be with you every step of the way. But even with your help. I'm still blind and quirkless. She could see the war in his mind between hope and doubt. Do you remember my earlier question? Izuku froze. A long moment passed before he replied. You asked what I would say if you told me you had a way for me to improve faster. A nod. You? Is that even possible? A broad smile stretched across the woman's face. It is. It's also how you're going to become a hero. A sparkle passed through the boy's eyes. He obviously had dozens of questions in his mind and was barely holding them back. The sight just caused Nana to smile all the wider. Midoriya, I want you to inherit my quirk. You know, there have been times where thinking about being a hero left a bad taste in my mouth, Izuku stated, tossing a third empty water bottle into the dumpster. I didn't think that'd ever be more than a figure of speech. Nana snorted much louder than she ever intended. Internally, she couldn't help but be proud of her student. You can't say I didn't warn you, the lady chuckled. Though if I'm being honest, you handled that a lot better than I did. When my predecessor had me eat his hair, it took 3 tries, 'cause I couldn't keep it down. It was the boy's turn to snort. To think that the greatest hero he knew, the symbol of peace, had a strong time doing something as simple as swallowing a hair seemed rather laughable indeed. To be fair, though, the hair did leave a surprisingly sour taste in his mouth, one he was now attempting to rinse out with a 4th bottle of water. So you really have no idea how this will affect me? Izuku asked after spitting a mouthful of water onto the sand. His mentor simply shook her head. I can only really speculate, honestly. Obviously when you activate it, it'll increase your physical strength exponentially. As far as passive effects, Nana paused, tapping her chin in thought. The only thing I know for sure is that it should enhance your senses somehow. Izuku perked up at this, possibilities running through his mind at breakneck speeds. Nana obviously noticed his reaction, because she smiled softly at him. Before you ask, no, I don't know if it will affect your hearing. It certainly didn't for me. She chuckled at what Izuku could only assume was a memory. For me, it helped my eyes. Passively, I can see farther than normal, and I can process higher speeds when it's active. A piece of an oven soared through the air, landing squarely in the dumpster with a loud banging noise. Izuku still was trying to decide whether or not this was all just a dream, even though the awful taste in his mouth suggested otherwise. It all seemed almost too good to be true. The #1 hero wanting to train him, even going so far as to give him her quirk. The hero's voice cut through his thoughts. There are 2 things I need to warn you of first. His heart jumped into his throat, anxiety slowly creeping through his mind. Well, the first is more of an order, really. I have to forbid you from fully activating your quirk until further notice. Izuku's heart skipped a beat at the tone in her voice. "Why is that?" Nana released a deep sigh before explaining. "As I explained, One for All stockpiles the strength of its users, past and present. When you activate your quirk for the first time, you won't be used to controlling it. It's likely that you'll accidentally tap into 100% of that power and could potentially hurt yourself." The boy paled and swallowed strong at the thought. "To avoid that, we're gonna kick up your strength training to prepare your body for it. Glad to hear you meant it when you said you didn't want me to break myself." The green-haired student couldn't help but passively wonder if it was too late for him to get 2 fingers in his throat and reverse the swallowing he did earlier. The pro-hero simply rolled her eyes in response. "There's one more thing that's a little up in the air with this," she continued. "So far, I'm the only wielder of One for All that previously had a quirk. That being the case, there's really no telling how that will affect things. The good thing is that my quirk is a healing quirk, one that reduced the effects of aging on my body and allowed me to recover from injuries faster than normal." Izuku sighed in relief at this revelation. "So basically, either nothing is different, or I get some side effects from your original quirk?" He tapped his chin in thought. "I wonder if the side effects would be a passive thing or if I'd have to consciously use it. I mean, it obviously has an active effect when you use it, but how much of it is passive? And I wonder if it'll be enhanced by One for All the same way strength and speed are." "You know, if you keep doing that," Nana interrupted, pulling the boy out of his musings, "I'm pretty sure you'll convince me you have some kind of intelligence quirk." With how warm his face felt, Izuku was certain he'd turned a spectacular shade of red. Sorry," he stammered. It's just that you've given me a lot to think about." Nana simply waved off the apology. "It's not a big deal, kid. I can only imagine how weird this all must sound. I've had One for All for around 45 years and I still don't fully understand it." Unfortunately for both, Izuku's brain was still on autopilot. "Wow, Ms. Nana. I didn't know you were so old." A few minutes later, the 2 plopped down onto the sand and leaned against the cement wall. Izuku was rubbing the new bruises on his arms while Nana nursed her injured pride, both breathing strong as a result of their brief skirmish. "Hopefully that'll teach you not to comment about a woman's age. I mean, you poke at my height all the time, so it seems only fair." Nana huffed. "This kid sure would have made you proud, Toshi." Moments passed before Izuku broke the silence that had fallen between them. "Ms. Nana? Have you not thought about my request?" The woman nodded. "I don't see any reason why you can't." She couldn't help but smile at the happiness and relief that formed on the boy's face. "The only condition is that I have to be there." "Come on, Hagakure. I know you're better than this." The floor of Ms. Fushiki's gym was not an unfamiliar place for Toru to be. Falling and getting thrown were all part of the learning process here. Today had been the worst though, and her instructor was obviously getting a little frustrated. "It's barely been 10 minutes and I've already knocked you over 7 times. Ms. Fushiki placed her hands on her hips, gazing down at her student intensely. "I know, I'm sorry," Toru mumbled as she pushed herself into a sitting position. "It's just my mind has kinda been all over the place." After a moment of sitting, she took her instructor's outstretched hand and was pulled to her feet. "Anything you'd like to talk about?" the woman asked with a hint of concern. "Sometimes saying it out loud can help put your mind at ease." The girl was silent for a long while. Before she took a shaking breath. "I told you about what happened with my mom, right?" A nod. "She's in rehab if I remember correctly." Toru nodded in confirmation, clenching and unclenching her gloved fists. "Did I tell you that my dad and I had to move as a result?" Another nod. Another shaking breath. "Well, since we moved, I actually had to switch to one of the nearby public schools." The same one as my friend Izuku, actually. Ms. Fushiki nodded along, but remained silent, allowing the girl to collect her thoughts. Because I such schools, I haven't been able to stay in contact with my old friends that much, so I've been trying to get to know some of the girls in my new class. I'm already friends with Izuku, and I think I'm getting there with his friend, Bakugo. It's strong to tell with him sometimes. Before the girl could continue, her instructor gestured towards the chairs along the side wall. Shall we? Toru nodded and followed the woman, taking a seat next to her. Might as well be comfortable as we talk. The girl thanked her before continuing. Like I said, I already have 2 friends at school, but I want to try and make more. It's just so strong because... She could feel a lump forming in her throat. With Izuku, things feel like they just come naturally. Like I'm really being myself. But with the other girls in class, I dunno, it feels more difficult. Does it feel like you have something to hide from them? Toru shook her head. Then what is it that is making it strong for you? It was a question she'd never stopped to consider. Why was it strong to make friends with the girls in class? What was she truly afraid of? I guess, I'm worried that it'll end up like most of my past friendships. Ms. Fushiki tilted her head, brow creasing. What do you mean by that? Toru sighed, finally able to quell her emotions and resting her chin on her hands. At my old school, we were just school friends. We'd talk in class, share gossip, stuff like that. But outside of class and texting, you were more of acquaintances than actual friends. The invisible girl nodded as her teacher finished her thought for her. So this time, you want it to be more meaningful, I'm guessing? The emotions were coming back now. I don't want to be dependent on Izuku for company. I know he's busy with his own things and I just don't want to be a burden to him. He's already done so much for me, especially after my mom, and then with my dad working. I don't want to be alone. A hand rested on her shoulder and for a brief moment she expected to see Izuku sitting next to her. Hagakure, can I ask something? Go ahead. A single tear dripped onto the gym floor. What makes Izuku so special? Toru froze. This was a question she'd been putting off for months now. She knew the answer all too well. But knowing it and saying it out loud were 2 totally different things. Ms. Fushiki seemed to know exactly what was going through the invisible girl's mind, if the Cheshire grin was anything to go by. You know, once you admit it to yourself, it just makes things easier. A long silence followed, during which Toru's heart and mind warred with each other. He makes me feel comfortable, she finally stated. He doesn't judge me for being insecure or for being invisible. I feel like I could talk to him about anything and everything. I like him. With those 3 words, Toru felt like a weight had removed itself from her. From the corner of her eye, she could see her instructor's grin widen and she couldn't help but smile, even as a few butterflies went wild in her stomach. See? That feels better, doesn't it? The 2 stood before Ms. Fushiki pulled her student into a brief hug. Before letting go, the older woman turned her head and whispered into the girl's ear. Now go tell him that. Toru, 1711, hey Izuku. Just saw your message after training. I can be at the beach in about 20 minutes, if that works. Izuku turned to his mentor and smiled. She's on her way. Said she'd be here in about 20 minutes. I know, Nana replied with a grin. I can hear your phone just as well as you can, short stack. Izuku rolled his eyes, about to reply to the message when his phone buzzed again. Toru, 1714, also. I have something I need to tell you, too. Ms. Nana? The lady turned back to face him. Did that sound off to you at all? The hero motioned for the boy to pass his phone over, which he did. It only took a moment for her to catch what was going on. Having never met the girl, she didn't know exactly what it meant, but she had some idea. She seems hesitant. She wrote this with pauses in it, at least. Izuku nodded in understanding, worry creasing his brow. I hope nothing bad happened. Me, 1716 okay. Sounds like a plan. Oh hey, Toru, Izuku stated as she stepped onto the sand before turning to smile at her. I don't think I'll ever get used to him being able to see me when I'm behind him. It's way too disconcerting. So you're the girl I've heard so much about it? Toru jumped at the unfamiliar voice. Somehow she'd completely missed the unfamiliar lady standing by her friend. He talks about me? The girl blushed at the thought before bowing to the stranger. That's me. You must be Ms. Shimura. The lady smiled. Please, just call me Nana. Or Ms. Nana if you have to be formal. She shot a pointed look at Izuku, who flushed in response. It's nice to finally meet you in person. Likewise, Toru replied. Izuku, you said you had something you needed to tell me? She turned back to her friend, tilting her head in curiosity. Izuku looked down at his feet as he spoke. Actually, I think it would be better if we showed you. As his voice trailed off, he turned towards the older woman, giving a sheepish grin. That'd make the explanation go a lot easier. I trust you're able to keep a secret, young lady? Nana's voice and gaze were stern, and even though her eyes didn't meet Toru's exactly, the girl could still feel as if the woman were gazing into her soul. It's very important that nothing you see or hear is shared with anyone else. Toru swallowed strong but nodded in agreement nonetheless. A tired-sounding sigh escaped the dark-haired lady's lips. Then she changed. Holy dash! Izuku could hear Toru's eyes go wide in surprise as Nana assumed her hero form, the age vanishing from her face as her toned musculature surfaced. The girl staggered backwards a few steps before falling to the sand. No way. She breathed. Why, you're really... All Might nodded with her signature smile. He could tell she was trying her best to not be intimidating, but none of that seemed to matter to Toru. I really am All Might, Hagakure, the heroine stated before reverting to her normal appearance. But my identity is not the reason your good friend asked you to come here. The girl simply remained silent with her mouth wide open, still slightly reeling in shock. The truth of the matter is that I have been looking for a successor. Someone who can take my place as the symbol of peace when the time comes. As it turns out, the lady turned to face Izuku. Midoriya here is the perfect candidate. He has a selfless heart and a drive to do good that I have only seen a few times before. He felt his ears and cheeks start to burn at the praise. Toru looked ready to burst. Something about the number one hero's declaration didn't sit right with her. Nana apparently noticed this as well, since she held up a hand to quell any forthcoming questions. Yes, I already know that Izuku is both blind and quirkless. The invisible girl's mouth snapped shut, though her worry did not abate in the slightest. I may not be able to do much about his sight, though he seems to have that pretty well under control. I can, however, remedy his lack of quirk. All Might's quirk can be passed on, Izuku interjected, noting the look of disbelief on his friend's face. She actually gave it to me a few hours ago, and already my vision has gotten a lot better. He couldn't help but smile as he continued. Outlines are clearer, I can see farther. Hell, I can just about tell what way your eyes are facing. He paused before continuing. But I didn't know you had freckles. I have what? A low-hanging sun illuminated the sidewalk as the two teens made their way home from the beach. The silence that stretched between them was almost comfortable, outside of the battle raging within the invisible girl's mind. Okay, it's just 3 little words. How strong can that be? But what if he doesn't? No, you're not going down that road. Thinking that way will only make this harder. It's a legitimate concern. He may not feel the same way at all. Toru? Is everything okay? The girl's eyes snapped up, noticing that she was a good distance behind her friend. He'd stopped once he noticed they were no longer side by side. Oh yeah, I'm fine, she stammered out. Jay, just thinking about everything? Izuku nodded for a moment before his eyes widened. Wait, I almost forgot. You said you had something to tell me? Toru's face paled, or at least it would have if it had any color. I did say that, didn't I? I can't back out now. Well, it's just... I've been thinking a lot recently. She stared at the ground as she spoke. The expectant look on his face was just too much for her. You know why you've done so much for me and inspired me. Especially with how strong you've been working on cleaning the beach. I just wanted to tell you. I can do this. I can do this. But I can't. That I am going to try and become a hero too. Izuku's eyes went wide with excitement as Toru smiled emptily at him. Holy cow. Toru, that would be amazing. You could be such an effective hero. With your invisibility. The boy's excitement and enthusiasm never reached her, even as she did her best to reply. As she watched her crush ramble on, she could feel her heart sinking further with every footstep. Feelings, sissy? I'm home. Inko peeked her head around the corner from the kitchen, watching as her son deposited his bag just inside his bedroom door. Welcome back, dear, the older Midoriya replied as Izuku trudged his way into the living room. How did everything go? A groan forced its way through the couch cushion into which Izuku had firmly planted his face. Mom? His voice was muffled to the point that Inko had to move from the kitchen to the living room in order to hear him clearly. How can you tell if someone likes you? Well, Inko started, failing to keep her enormous smile from leaking into her voice. There's not really a simple answer to that, sweetie. The lady stifled a giggle as she watched her son go limp in frustration. But that doesn't mean there aren't a few universal signs. Izuku extracted himself from his spot on the couch, sitting upright and turning to face his mother. What kind of signs? He asked, an eagerly expectant look on his face that caused her to giggle again. They're little things, really. Slight differences in how they act around you compared to other people. Inko paused, tilting her head in thought. Smiling when they see you. Trusting you with serious things. Watching you when they think you don't notice. The grin on her face grew to mischievous proportions. Is there a reason, you ask? Her son flailed in panic. And no reason. I was just wondering. Why, like Jay, just in case something did happen? Inko couldn't hold back her laughter at her son's desperate attempts to avoid her suspicion. Eventually he realized it was no good and seemed to accepted his fate. Slumping against the couch he faced the older Midoriya. Do you think she likes me? You're talking about Hagakure, right? Izuku nodded after a moment of hesitation. Inko chuckled with a soft smile. To be honest, her being invisible makes it a little difficult for me to notice things. I can't see her face as well as you can. Her son slouched a little at that, obviously discouraged at the news. But, even with that, it's easy to see that she's very comfortable around you. The way her son's face lit up at her words caused Inko to beam. His reaction all but confirmed the suspicions she'd had for a few weeks now, that Izuku had been harboring feelings for his invisible friend. This posed a brand new question, however. Another question the older Midoriya was sure she knew the answer to. Have you told her how you feel yet? Izuku paled, his smile freezing in place briefly before falling. No. I haven't had the courage to tell her yet. I almost did today as we were heading home from the beach, but I got too scared and didn't know how she would react. I'm still not entirely sure if she likes me yet, so I'll have to just dash. Izuku. Sweetie, it's fine. Inko moved herself to the couch, sitting next to her son. You just have to realize that you'll need to tell her at some point. Especially if you want anything to come from it. The boy swallowed strong before nodding his understanding. And besides, there's a possibility she feels the same, but is too nervous to say anything. You never really know until you try. Thanks, Mom, Izuku said, returning his mother's soft smile with one of his own. I'll definitely have to think about all this, but thank you for helping me. Inko pulled her son into a brief tight embrace before giving him a nudge off the couch. Now get going. You need to wash up from your exercises while I get dinner all ready. Kaito watched his daughter's spoon swirl aimlessly in her bowl of curry. It was the only real cue he had to what was going through the young girl's mind. If it's cold already, I'd be more than happy to run it in the microwave for a bit for you. The words seemed to pull Toru back to the present. Oh, no, it's fine. She quickly dumped a large spoonful of the curry into her mouth. Oh, shit. The older Hagakure couldn't help but laugh as his daughter had to spit the still steaming curry back into her bowl, fanning her tongue to relieve the burning sensation. Once the silence had returned and Toru had been able to successfully eat a few bites of her curry, Kaito's curiosity and concern got the best of him. Definitely seems like you've got something bothering you, he started, blowing on a spoonful of dinner. I haven't seen you this distracted in a good while now. Toru hummed and nodded absently. Yeah, I guess I have a lot on my mind right now. Well, I'm more than happy to listen or give advice if you need it, honey. Her dad gave a soft smile before turning back to his own bowl. The silence between the two stretched on for another minute before Toru sighed and dropped her head onto her arms. Ugh, I'm such an idiot. Not quite what I was expecting. Toru, what are you talking about? The girl shook her head against her arms, an action only made obvious by the movement of her clothing. You know my friend Izuku. Well, I was gonna tell him that I like him a few weeks ago, but I chickened out. There was a quiet clattering sound as everything on the table jumped slightly. She must have hit her head against it. Kaito chuckled as he ate another spoonful of curry. It's a good thing you go to school with him then. He chuckled harder at the groan that came from his invisible daughter. What do you think was holding you back? That's the thing. I don't know, Toru groaned, leaning back in her seat. I thought I'd worked up the courage and everything. But when I was about to say it, he was smiling at me and it made my brain go all. She ended by blowing a raspberry, arms flailing in frustration. As his daughter's arms dropped to her side, and after a moment of silence, Kaito shook his head with a smile. The funny thing about all this is that I've been in your shoes here. Really? Hope and disbelief mingled in the girl's voice. You had trouble with this sort of thing? The man nodded slowly, closing his eyes. I told you how your mother and I met? It was a mutual friend, right? You went to the same boarding school or something? He hummed in affirmation. They got us to sit together at lunch one day during our second term. Took almost 4 months to realize that I liked her. Opening his eyes, Toru's father finished off the last of his curry before continuing. I had to work up the courage 3 separate times before I was finally able to tell her. Toru giggled at the idea, causing her dad to smile softly at her. So how did you finally tell her? Kaito's smile grew wide. I pretty much just shouted it at her in one of the courtyards after classes. He laughed strong at the memory, a laugh which his daughter echoed. I was so scared she'd turn me down, but I decided to just get it over with. Thankfully the courtyard was pretty empty or I would have died of embarrassment. It took a few moments for Toru's laughter to die down. Once she was calm, she had to take a few breaths before speaking, not wanting to break out laughing again. So, oh man, so you just said it? And you didn't have any idea if she liked you back? That's part of why I was so scared, he answered, nodding. As it turns out, she wasn't even sure. Took her 2 days to actually decided that she liked me too. Holy see, Toru exclaimed, barely catching herself. That must have been so nerve-wracking. Switching schools had never seemed like such a good idea before then, Kaito replied with a chuckle, standing and taking both of their dishes to the sink. Toru giggled. But even with that stress, I never regretted telling her. The invisible girl had followed her father into the kitchen, turning on the sink and starting to wash the dishes, apparently deep in thought. After a minute she finally spoke. So don't you think I should just tell him? Even if he doesn't like me back? Kaito simply nodded, pulling his daughter into a gentle embrace. It's better to get it out there and know, than to hold it in and wonder. The first term seemed to fly by. Izuku seemed to be getting more and more confident by the day, a fact which made Katsuki very happy, even though he'd die before he ever admitted it out loud. He was still a muttering mess at times, and would turn redder than a demon tomato whenever Invisalign said something nice to him, but his shyness and stuttering were almost non-existent at this point. But there was something about the green-haired boy that had become more and more obvious to the blonde teen as the year progressed. Something that was getting more irritating with each passing day. God damn it, Deku. When are you gonna just grow a pair and tell her? Tell who, the boy stammered, obviously trying to deny whatever Katsuki was insinuating. Katsuki growled in frustration. Don't give me that bullshit. You know dimmin' well who I'm talking about. Izuku swallowed strong. Well yeah, but what do why you mean? Tell her what? When? Are you gonna tell her? That you like her? He spoke through gritted teeth. A few small explosions echoed from his hands as his anger slowly got the best of him. I don't dash. You do. A larger explosion burst from Katsuki's palm, causing the shorter boy to jump. He knew the blonde wouldn't hit him, but that didn't mean he wouldn't let his anger show. Don't you try to deny it, Deku. I've seen how you act around her. I've been watching it for almost 10 demon months now. He cracked his fingers as the two resumed their after-school walk home. blushing when she talks to you, spending almost all your free time with her. I bet you'd even be staring at her all the time if you could. Makes me diamen near vomit. Izuku was silent for a long moment before he spoke. Why are you bringing this up, Kaken? The blonde sighed, trying strong to keep his agitation out of his voice. I'm only gonna say this once, so you better diamen well listen. He took a deep breath. Believe it or not, I actually care about you, you shitty nerd. Invisalign obviously makes you happy, so you better tell her before some other piece of shit tries to make a move. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see his green-haired friend smile a little. Feelings were something Katsuki often avoided talking about, so the fact that he was saying anything obviously meant he cared. So what do you think I should do? The hell do I look like, some kind of DMN guru or something? Katsuki growled. Tell her you like her. Ask her out. I don't care what the hell you do, just do something. He turned and started heading in the opposite direction as the other teen, now that they had reached where their paths split. And whatever you do, be sure to leave me the hell out of it. I will. Thanks, Kaken. Dimanda. I hope you don't go and screw this up. He quickly hid the smile that formed on his face. Summer was finally drawing to a close when Izuku and Toru found themselves yet again on the beach. All Might had called out on a major case, so the two were left to train on their own. Izuku had finally been allowed to activate One for All a few weeks earlier, and was slowly getting the hang of using it at 5%. The three had also discovered that the boy had indeed inherited some of Nana's original quirk. He'd broken 2 fingers during the initial trial, but they had fully healed within an hour or so. After a couple of rounds, during which Toru had plenty of chances to show off some of the judo throws and locks her own trainer had been teaching her, the two teens decided it was time for a break. They sat with their backs to the concrete wall, basking in the cool breeze that blew in over the ocean. You said your suit upgrade should be done in a week or so? Izuku asked, taking a drink from his water bottle. Toru nodded, rolling her shoulders slightly before grabbing a bottle of her own. Yep. Dad's friend said the new shoes should make me almost totally silent. They were just having some trouble getting my hair into the fabric to make them invisible. The boy nodded in understanding, closing his eyes and leaning his head back. I gotta say, she continued after a brief silence, you're getting a lot better at avoiding some of my holds. Izuku grinned at the praise. Helps that I have a good teacher. Did he really just wink at me? Toru felt herself blush as she turned away slightly, drinking from her water bottle. For a few minutes the two simply sat there, listening to the call of the seabirds, watching as the sun behind them gleamed across the waves. You know, Izuku started slowly, I think we can probably call it for the day. We've been training strong this week, it'll be okay if we take a break just for today. He turned to smile at his friend, who returned the gesture. It's like you read my mind or something. The two pushed themselves to their feet after gathering their things, making their way up the stairs and back onto the sidewalk. As they walked, Izuku began rambling slightly about a new hero debut he'd read about. The hero had an odd quirk. It appeared that his whole body was made out of wood, and he was able to manipulate it at will. Toru couldn't help but smile as her friend went on and on about the quirk, its possible uses and weaknesses, and even some possible partners he'd work well with. Izuku. Her voice halted the boys' ramblings in their tracks. I was wondering if my dad won't be home from work for a while, and well, God, why is it so strong to ask? Of course, Toru. Izuku interrupted her train of thought. You're welcome to come over any time. That dim and smile. As she followed the boy up a few flights of stairs, she was finally able to re-find her voice. Hey, and you're sure your mom won't mind? Izuku waved his hand, dismissing her worry. Not at all. She loves having you over, remember? Besides, it looks like she's not home yet. He jiggled the locked door handle to emphasize his point before pulling out his key. The two teens kicked off their shoes before making their way into the small apartment. Mind if I use a bathroom so I can change? Toru asked as they entered the kitchen. Of course. Feel free to use the shower if you want. Toru smiled at her friend. That'd be great. The boy led his friend to his bathroom, pointing out where fresh towels were and giving a brief explanation of the shower knobs before closing the door on his way out. Once alone, the girl quickly freed herself of her sweaty workout clothes, depositing them by the door before starting the water. Steam slowly filled the small room as Toru allowed the warm water to spill over her. She took her time in rinsing the sweat from her body, letting her thoughts wander a little. Now is probably the best chance I'm gonna get. Especially with the new term starting soon. But what happens if he doesn't feel the same? What if he doesn't know? Can I take that? Remember what Dad said? It's better to just get it out there. Do I even have the courage to tell him? For a few minutes, the only sound in the room was the steady stream of water as Toru quickly finished washing herself. Once dry, she took her time in pulling on her clean everyday clothes, trying her best to delay what she knew she needed to do. A voice from the other side of the door pulled her from her thoughts. Hey Toru? Just wanted to let you know, my mom probably won't be home until this evening. Wonderful. Now I get to work up the courage to tell him while we're alone together. Okay, thanks for the heads up. I'll be out in just a moment. After finishing getting dressed, Toru made her way out into the kitchen. Izuku had taken up residence on the couch and was flipping through channels idly on the TV, but turned and smiled when he noticed her. I was hoping I'd find something good to listen to before you finished, but haven't had any luck. Toru giggled as she took a seat at the opposite end of the couch, snatching the remote from his hand. Let me see if I can't find us anything. After catching the second half of an old superhero movie from before the dawn of Quirks, which was followed by a delicious American-style pizza courtesy of Izuku's mother, the decision was made that it was now or never. Izuku was walking Toru down the stairs when they paused on one of the landings. Toru hey Izuku . The two blushed. No, you go . It's okay I'll . With a giggle, Toru gestured for Izuku to speak first. He took a deep breath to steady himself. Toru, I was wondering if maybe on Friday we could, I dunno, maybe go get some dinner together or something? Wow, Izuku. Really laying on the charm there. Toru's eyes widened slowly as his words registered. Izuku, are you? She too had to steady herself. He loved to, Izuku. Izuku felt his heart skip a beat. Really? You mean it? Her smile was almost blinding. I really do Izuku. The smile faltered slightly. But, do you mean like a date? Izuku blushed wildly as he nodded, not trusting his voice. The girl's smile returned full force as she threw her arms around the boy, pulling him into a tight embrace. Oh, Izuku, I can't tell you how happy this makes me. The boy wore a face of stunned relief mixed with surprise. Wait, that means you actually like you? The girl finished, still smiling from ear to ear. I do, Izuku. I really do like you. I'm home. Kaito looked up from the papers he was browsing at the kitchen table, watching as his daughter practically danced her way into the house. Though she was invisible, he could imagine the broad smile that was gracing her features. Seems like someone's in a good mood this evening, he said with a grin, chuckling as Toru plopped herself down across from him. A contented sigh escaped her before she giggled happily. I have had the best day ever, she stated wistfully, laying her head on her arms on the table. I am the happiest girl alive. Izuku was barely aware of the apartment door opening and closing as his mother arrived, as the memories of a few hours ago still played in his mind. He was sure he had been dreaming when she said that she liked him. It had seemed real enough. Just as real as his own heart still hammering away at his ribcage. Izuku, is everything all right? Somehow, his mother's voice breaks into his consciousness, pulling him from his catatonic state. Boy, I'm fine, he stammers, obviously not fine. He did his best to smile, not really sure if it looked creepy or fake. His mother stared for a moment longer before turning and opening the refrigerator. Well, if there's something worrying you, you know you can always tell me, honey. I tried. I know. He hesitated, then slowly stood and moved to help with dinner. Could you fill this up with hot water for me? Inko handed her son one of the smaller cooking pots, which he obediently took. His thoughts continued to turn through his mind, though on a different track than before. He started, shutting off the water and placing the pot on the stovetop. I have something to tell you. He could feel his face flushing. Why is this harder than telling Toru that I like her? What is it, Izuku? Inko sounded concerned at the seriousness of her son's tone. Upon seeing his sheepish smile and flushed complexion, her face quickly broke into a grin. The boy wrung his hands nervously. Well, why, you know how I asked you a while back about how to tell if someone likes you? I decided to just tell Toru that I like her, and she said she likes me too, and now we kind of have a date planned for next weekend, and I'm really nervous and I think I might be dreaming, but it all seems real and I just don't want to mess this up, so I wanted to know dash. His nervous ramblings were cut short as his mother threw her arms around him, tears already welling in her eyes. Oh, Izuku, I'm so proud of you. This makes me so happy. She pulled back and sniffled, smiling warmly at her son, who was smiling just as wide. I'm sure you'll do just fine. Why, you really think so? Inko nodded. I really do. You're a sweet boy, always trying to help people. I don't think you'll have any issues making her happy. Izuku breathed a sigh of relief. It felt like some of the weight on his shoulders had vanished. Then he noticed how his mother's smile had changed, and was suddenly reminded why he'd been nervous about telling her. Just remember not to give me any grandchildren too soon, okay? The teasing. Ms. Fushigi couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and wonder as she sat in the middle of the courtroom, not really paying any attention to the proceedings. Instead, she simply watched as the red and yellow blob of heat crept by the other attendees, drawing as much attention as a stray speck of dust. Thanks to her heat sense quirk, the teacher was able to keep track of the invisible girl, and she was quite sure she was the only one in the building with that ability. Over the last 2 months, she'd watched as Toru had put her heart and soul into training. The girl's stealth skills had improved to the point where she could give most security systems a strong time, while her hand-to-hand abilities could rival that of most high schoolers. Something had set a fire under the girl, and Ms. Fushigi had a good idea what, or who, that something was. After a few more minutes, the older woman made a short waving gesture, signaling for Toru that the exercise was over and she could sit down. The girl bowed where she stood, then quietly padded over to where the woman sat, taking a seat on the bench next to her. I don't think anyone noticed this time, Toru stated, her smile evident in her voice. Even the guy who had his pen in his shirt pocket? The teacher smiled in return as she took the offered handful of pens that were the objective of the day's exercise. I saw. He actually did notice, but not for a good couple of minutes. She had to stifle a laugh at the memory of the bewildered face the man had sported when he'd realized his fancy pen had gone missing. As the two left the courthouse, Ms. Fushigi made a stop by the entry desk to drop off the newly acquired pens. I have to say, Hagakure, your progress has been quite impressive, she commented as she and her students stepped out into the cool fall air. The weather had been quite mild for November, something both teacher and student had greatly appreciated. You're really serious about getting into UA, huh? She watched as Toru's face started to glow a little brighter. Why, yeah, I really want to become a hero and help people. Izuku and I are trying really strong to get in. Ms. Fushigi couldn't hide her grin at the mention of the boy's name. She clearly remembered the day when Toru had come into the gym practically bouncing with excitement. The day before had been her first actual date with the green-haired boy, and from what she could tell, everything had gone very smoothly to say the least. Sounds like he's been having quite a good influence on you, young lady. Her voice echoed the grin on her face. Especially with how much harder you've been working lately. Well, my quirk only really helps with stealth, Toru stated as the pair made their way back to the gym. Sure, it can mask my intentions with hand-to-hand, but that'll only get me so far. If I really want to be a hero, I need some skill and strength to back it up. The teacher tapped her chin thoughtfully. You're still helping him clean up the beach? The girl nodded. Good, keep that up. That should help with the strength part. Toru nodded again. That's what I thought too. I'll try to push myself even more there. The grin on the woman's face turned into a true smile. If anyone I know has the drive to become a hero, it's this girl. And if anyone can help her get there, it sounds like this Izuku is the perfect one. Toru pulled the blankets even closer as the winter storm raged outside her window. After the mild fall weather they'd had, the sudden intensity of winter hardly came as a surprise, though that didn't make it any more pleasant. A flash broke through the room, and the subsequent clap of thunder had the girl burying her face in her pillow, choking back a sob of fear. The howl of the wind and pounding rain only made the whole situation worse. With shaking hands, she reached for the phone resting on her nightstand. "Me 2023, are you awake still?" She tried her best to steady her breathing, only to yelp and panic slightly more as another clap of thunder split the night. Thankfully, she didn't have to wait long for a reply. "Izuku 3, 2024, I am. Izuku 3, 2025, do you need to come over? Me 2025, please? Izuku 3, 2027, the door is unlocked. You can let yourself in." Without a moment of hesitation, Toru threw herself from her bed, quickly pulling on a coat and grabbing her apartment key before rushing out the door. She practically sprinted down the walkway to the stairs, taking them 3 at a time up to the top floor. Thankfully, the walkway was well shielded from the rain, but the cold and the thunder still shook her to her core. The door to Izuku's apartment was unlocked, just as he'd promised. Once inside, she quickly shed her coat and shoes, leaving them both by the front door before moving into the apartment. Just as she rounded the corner to the living room, a massive crack of thunder shook the building. Toru screamed with fear, diving onto the couch next to her boyfriend and burying her face into his shoulder. Izuku said nothing, whether because of surprise or worry, she didn't know. Instead, she felt a hand rest gently on her back while another ran slowly through her hair. She still shook, tensing and gripping the boy's shirt when another echoing boom sounded, but she could feel herself calming down. After a few minutes, Toru pulled her face away from Izuku's shoulder, curling up into his side in a more comfortable and relaxed manner. "Thank you." Izuku smiled down at her, fingers still running through her hair. "Why, you know I'm here for you. I meant it when I said it, and I still mean it." Warmth spread through her whole body at the words. With that being said, his smile turned into a grin. "Do you mind if I get us a drink? I'm pretty thirsty." "Fine." A mock pout formed on the invisible girl's face as she relinquished her grip on the boy. He chuckled slightly before standing and heading to the kitchen, returning a little later with a tall glass of juice for the two to share. Toru had taken it upon herself to find a mindless TV show to have playing in the background, settling on a cooking competition show before snuggling back into her boyfriend's side. "So," Izuku said after a minute. "I didn't know you were afraid of storms like this." The girl nodded slowly against his shoulder. "Usually I can go to my dad, but he's at a conference this weekend," she explained. I didn't know what else to do." The minutes stretched into hours. The couple eventually decided to order food from a nearby sushi place that did WhatIf, since Izuku's mom was under the weather and had been in bed all day. As the two sat and ate, Toru could see the bags under Izuku's eyes more clearly. "Izu?" He looked up at her tiredly. "How long have you been awake?" The boy dipped his head in embarrassment, mumbling out something that Toru didn't quite catch. Upon further prodding, he repeated himself. "Since yesterday morning. With Mom sick, I've been trying my best to take care of her." A sharp jab from his girlfriend's chopsticks brought a quiet yelp from the boy. He gave her a betrayed look as he rubbed his arm. "I know you're worried about her, and I know you want to help people. But don't roll your eyes at me, you can't take care of someone else if you don't take care of yourself." She jabbed him. Again for emphasis. "I'll get some sleep." He swatted her chopsticks as they came in a third time. "Just stop stabbing me, geez." Toru giggled lightly as she turned back to her food. When they both had finished, Izuku reached for her empty box, but quickly had his hand swatted. No. You go get ready for bed, mister." The green-haired boy pulled a fake pout, which only earned him another jab from his girlfriend's chopsticks, then hurried off to his bedroom. Once he was out of sight, the girl quietly gathered up the remains of their dinner, setting utensils in the sink and throwing out any garbage before returning to the couch to watch more TV. The storm outside had mostly passed, but it was still raining heavily against the window. Even still, Toru definitely did not want to be left alone tonight. Silently praising herself for still being in her pajamas, she patted her way to Izuku's bedroom door, carefully twisting the handle and pushing her way inside. The themed alarm clock on the nightstand was the only light in the room as Toru slid the door shut behind her. As her eyes adjusted, she could see the sleeping form of her boyfriend, lying on his side, facing the wall. With as much care as possible, she gently pulled back the covers just enough for her to slide in, then pulled herself into a spooning position with him and laid her arm over his side. Izuku started to stir at the contact, though it took nearly a full minute for the situation to register with him. Tigituru. WW what are YYU dash. She cut him off, putting one finger over his lips, suddenly very aware of how NTMT of a position they were in. What the hell was I thinking? I really didn't want to be alone tonight. So I thought I'd just join you. I mean. Sorry, this is just the first time I've been into the situation. The boy was obviously still freaking out, but was trying to be okay with sharing a bed with her. Are you sure this is okay? Toru nodded, ignoring the internal screaming that was going on. I'm sure. It took a few minutes for Izuku to finally relax, but once that was achieved, sleep followed quickly. Toru felt his breathing even out, hearing the soft snores that told her he was fast asleep. With a smile and a blush, Toru lifted her head and left a light embrace on the boy's cheek. I love you, Izuku. Izuku swallowed strong as he stood in front of the testing facility, feeling his heart race in his psyche. He'd spent most of his winter break, as well as a good portion of his free time during the first term of third year, studying his heart out. But all the hours of study and practice tests couldn't stave off the anxiety currently building in his psyche. Hey, the harsh voice to his side caught his attention. Snap out of it, will ya? There's no turning back now. And besides, you've already studied your butt off for this thing. If there's anyone aside from me who can pass, it's you. The green-haired boy couldn't help but smile at the words. Thanks, Kaken. But could you maybe tone down the pride for, just a few minutes? Katsuki huffed before shoving his hands in his pockets and walking off towards the open doors. Just don't go screwing this up and making an butt of yourself. To his other side, Toru giggled. You know he means well, Izu, she hummed, then nudged her boyfriend forward. Come on. The sooner we pass this, the sooner we can get on our way. The wink and knowing smile she gave turned Izuku into a blushing, stuttering mess, but he started walking nonetheless. Upon entering the facility, Toru had to part ways with Izuku so as to not be late for her own test. The boy watched silently for a moment as more and more hopefuls entered the building and were directed to their respective testing rooms. Young man, one of the proctors called to him. Do you need help finding where to go? Izuku blushed slightly, turning to face the lady who'd spoken. Why yes, actually. I actually need to take my test verbally. The lady nodded and hummed in recognition. Oh, so you're the blind boy we heard about. Who was it? Midoriya, he corrected. They heard about me? What? Oh yes, sorry. The lady chuckled lightly, pulling out a thin file from a box on the table. If I could have you follow me, I'll take you to your testing room. With that, she motioned for Izuku to follow, which he did. Almost immediately, she turned to apologize, but froze as she noticed the boy walking right alongside her. I'm sorry I dash. No, it's fine. Izuku waved his hand, smiling. And my quirk actually helps me see through my hearing. Kind of like echolocation. The proctor nodded in understanding before leading him down the hallway and into one of the classrooms, leaving him there while she went to find his tester. After a minute of waiting, the door reopened, revealing a shorter man in a button-down dress shirt and slacks with a necktie hanging loosely from under the collar. Midoriya Izuku? The newcomer asked as he walked to the long table on the far side of the room, seating himself behind it. The boy nodded in reply. That's me, sir. I assume you're my tester? You would be correct. My name is Maijima Higuri. The man shuffled some of the papers on the table around, making sure everything was organized as Izuku took his seat. Ready to begin? As ready as I'll ever be. For the last time, Clarisil, I don't have a dim clue. But he's taking the same test we did, right? He should be done by now. She could tell Katsuki was getting irritated, if the nearly audible grinding of teeth was any indication. Also, Clarisil? Where did that one come from, Boom Boy? The blonde shrugged, obviously grateful for the change in topic. Maybe I'm branching out. The hell does it matter? Toru rocked from side to signal her indecision. It doesn't. Though I think I might start to miss being called Invisalign. With a huff, Katsuki turned back to facing the building, then quickly broke into a grin. Looks like the nerd's finally done. The girl whipped her head up, eyes landing on a familiar mop of green hair as her boyfriend exited the testing facility, a half-empty water bottle in his hand. He seemed somewhat worn out, but he wore a triumphant grin as he made his way towards his two friends. I don't know about you two, Izuku rasped as he drew closer, but I'm ready to collapse for a bit. Did the staff give you a longer test or something? I thought that sheet would be easy for you. There was a hint of worry in the explosion quirk user's voice, unnoticeable unless you knew what to look for. Izuku just shook his head, taking a quick drink from his bottle. My tester had some questions about my sight. Plus, it takes longer when you have someone reading the questions to you rather than just reading it yourself. He shook the water bottle for emphasis. Kinda wears you out after a bit? Toru moved further to the edge of the bench she and Katsuki had been occupying, giving her boyfriend room to sit down. So how do you think you did? The boy immediately flushed at her words, looking down for a moment before fishing in his pocket. WL. I actually already have my score. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and passed it to Toru who, after studying Izuku's face for a minute, slowly unfolded it. Come on, I'm sure it's not that Toru's voice was cut silent as what she was seeing. She even double and triple checked that the UA seal was, in fact, on the paper. Let me see that. Katsuki snatched the paper from her grasp, eyes going wide as what was written fully registered. 100% can't wait to see you next year. Maijima Higuri. Izuku. Toru squealed with delight, pulling the green-haired teen into a tight embrace. You aced it. I'm so proud of you. The embrace only lasted for a few moments before Toru's mind went to autopilot. Her lips met his before she could stop herself. 15 years of life could not have prepared him for this. He knew it was an eventuality. After all, the two had been dating for nearly a year at this point. Even still, it was something he'd only ever thought of as a far-off dream. Today was already turning out to be better than a dream. Izuku had just met the Pro Hero Power Loader and had then proceeded to get a perfect score on the UA written entrance exam, two things which were, quite literally, dreams come true. But this was something else. His girlfriend was embracing him, like with her lips. On his lips. So he did the only thing he could think of at that moment. Nothing. Inko couldn't help but smile as she stepped carefully away from the bedroom door, closing it silently behind her. Izuku and Toru had come home from the exam about an hour ago, hand in hand and beaming. It wasn't until the girl had left to help her father with some errands that Izuku had revealed what happened. Pride welled in her as she glanced towards the paper resting on the counter, remembering how her son had told her how everything went. How he and Toru. Her eyes wandered to the bedroom door again, where her son was now sleeping, the memory of a few months ago coming back to her mind. She could hear the two teens in the kitchen. It was obvious they were trying their best to be considerate and keep the noise level down, but a mother's hearing is nothing to sneeze at. Want to help people? Toru's voice filtered in through the door. But don't roll your eyes at me, you can't take care of someone else if you don't take care of yourself. You tell him, girl, Inko thought, smiling to herself before taking a small drink from the glass of water on her nightstand. She listened a while longer before drifting off to sleep again. When she next woke up, she was greeted by silence. She pulled herself into a sitting position with a groan, giving her body a minute to adjust before standing and walking towards the kitchen, empty glass in hand. Inko knew she hadn't been dreaming when she saw the DLVI boxes in the trash can. A smile crossed her face as she refilled her drink, remembering the bits of conversation she'd overheard. Knowing Izuku had someone else watching out for him definitely put her heart at ease. Just as she was about to head back to bed, however, she noticed something out of the corner of her eye. Toru's jacket, hanging in the entryway. The woman stepped towards the front door, at first fearing that the girl had left the coat behind when she'd left, but quickly dismissed that thought when she saw that her shoes were still there as well. All this did was bring about a new thought. Her answer came in the form of hushed voices emanating from her son's room. As quietly as she could, Inko moved to the shut door and pressed her ear against the wood. Oh, I didn't want to be alone tonight. So I thought I'd just join you. Sorry, this is just the first time I've been into this situation. Are you as sure this is okay? Inko twisted the handle slowly, pushing the door open just enough for her to peek into the dark room. The sight before her was what she had expected, but it filled her with warmth nonetheless. Turu's clothed form was cuddled up against Izuku's back, one arm over his waist. It looked like Izuku's fingers were intertwined with hers, but she couldn't tell from this distance. Just as she was about to back out and close the door, she saw the girl's form shift and was barely able to make out the whispered confession. Her smile didn't leave until well after she fell back asleep. You see, Izuku, Inko muttered to herself, pulling herself from her thoughts and refocusing on the dinner she was making. I told you you'd have no problem making her happy. All right, nothing to worry about, Izuku muttered as he paced back and forth through his room. It's not like this is your first time going on a date with her or anything. You've been dating her for almost a year. You should be used to this by now. The boy glanced at his clock for what must have been the 8th time in the last 3 minutes. He still had over 2 hours before he was supposed to meet Turu at her apartment for their date. Still, we just had our first embrace yesterday, so I dunno, maybe that changes things now. He froze at the words, remembering the moment in question with vivid detail. Especially his own reaction. With a groan, Izuku flopped backwards onto his bed, hands covering his face. Why did I have to freeze up like that? Why couldn't I have just embraced her back like a normal person? I just really hope she didn't take it as some kind of rejection. Well, now you have to make sure she doesn't think that. The implications caused his brain to temporarily short out. There were only 2 possibilities in his mind that would make sure Turu knew he didn't reject her embrace. Tell her, I love you, or embrace her in return. I can't just KK embrace her out of nowhere. I'm supposed to just kinda let that happen. Right? That's what happens with that kind of thing, right? So that just leaves. Do I love her? Izuku slowly pulled himself to his feet, barely aware of his movements as he padded to the bathroom and started the shower. I don't think so? What does it feel like to love someone? Turu was practically skipping as she and Izuku made their way towards the train station. The boy couldn't help but smile at the seemingly endless energy his girlfriend was radiating. Okay, so I know most arcades are just video games and stuff, but I really think you'll like this one. I used to go there all the time after school. Izuku blushed lightly. I've never actually been to an arcade before, he confessed. You are sure you don't mind explaining it all to me? Turu giggled lightly. Of course not, silly. I kind of figured you'd be new to it all, anyway. Though I may have forgotten you still can't see screens when I pitched the idea. Now it was her turn to blush. But there's still lots of other games that we can play. The smile on Izuku's face grew a little wider as his girlfriend, still not used to that, continued gushing about all the possibilities. He knew how difficult it could be for them to plan outings like this one, especially considering the limits his blindness caused. Because of it, nearly all of their dates up to this point had involved going to the park or trying out a new restaurant. No matter how much his hearing and touch allowed him to see, screens were the one barrier he couldn't cross. Movies, TV, video games, all of it was out of the question. It was touching, to say the least, that Turu was still trying. Sure, there would be quite a few things he wouldn't be able to do at the arcade, but she didn't seem to mind that at all. Instead, she just went on and on about everything they could do. He was absolutely sure he would treasure this day for years to come. His thoughts continued to wander a little before Turu's voice pulled him back. Izuku, you in there? Well, sorry. I got a little lost in thought there. I figured as much, Turu replied with a giggle. Seems like you've had a lot on your mind this whole time. Izuku nodded slowly, noticing how the girl's face became more serious. I guess I'm just really happy. I know going to an arcade can be a really simple thing, but this really means a lot to me, you know? Turu's smile returned a little softer this time. I think I understand. We've been kinda limited, what with school and training. Not to mention, she gestured vaguely towards Izuku, but didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. Besides, I figured I could, never mind. The hesitation was not lost on Izuku. You figured? Apprehensive as he was, he had to try strong to keep from laughing at the embarrassed look that crossed her face. No, Turu pouted. Izuku was sure she was blushing. It's cheesy and you'll laugh at me. He gave what he hoped was a reassuring smile. Cheesy can be good, right? I promise I won't laugh. Toru fidgeted slightly, remaining silent for a while. I was gonna say, I figured I could share something special to me with someone special to me. The words came out in a rush. I know, it's dumb and cheesy, but you really mean a lot to me, and I wanted to do something special, but dash? Toru. Izuku's voice cut the girl off. Tears were starting to form in his eyes. That really means so much. I don't think it's cheesy at all. His smile brightened as he took her hand in his, squeezing lightly for emphasis, hoping to convey even a small portion of the warmth she made him feel. An hour or two after Izuku and Toru entered the arcade, a lanky figure darted into an alley just a few blocks away. Now I just gotta lay low or find somewhere to hide dash. Voices cut off the figure's thoughts, causing him to dive behind a dumpster. He could see a trio of middle schoolers making their way towards where he was hiding, though it appeared they hadn't noticed him. Put that sheet away. You know how much trouble we'd be in if someone caught you smoking. Relax, man, no one's gonna see dash. Small explosions crackled out of the first boy's palm. I'm not gonna let you risk my perfect record just 'cause you picked up some shitty habit from your old man. Another explosion cracked the air as he knocked the whole packet of cigarettes from the other boy's hand. Looks like I just found my ticket out of here. Time flew by as the couple bounced from game to game, not really worrying about how many tickets they earned. Izuku seemed to catch on pretty quickly with most of the games, though they both quickly discovered he had an uncanny ability to nail the center hole in skee-ball. Throughout the entirety of their date, Izuku found himself focusing more on Toru than on the games. She seemed to truly be in her element, like she was able to let go of her worries and let loose all of her excitability. He smiled as she celebrated even the smallest of victories and brushed off every failure. Many times, when she smiled or laughed, he felt as if the rest of the world simply fell away. Maybe that's what it feels like? After exhausting all of their coins, Toru decided to take her boyfriend to her favorite nearby eatery, something Izuku was grateful for as he'd eaten a fairly small breakfast before their date began. He pocketed the stacks of tickets the two had earned, then followed his girlfriend out into the sun. Geez, Izu, the girl said with a grin. I know I said it in there, but if I didn't know any better I'd think you had an aiming quirk or something. Izuku chuckled slightly, flushing a little at the praise. Why, you're one to talk. Apparently you absolutely killed it with the dancing game. It was true, while he hadn't been able to see the screen, he could tell by the reactions of others watching that Toru had performed each song just about perfectly. The girl in question giggled. That's just 'cause I've had lots of practice. I've played those songs at least a dozen times each. The banter continued as the two made their way down the sidewalk. As they neared the corner where the eatery was, they saw a large crowd that had formed about halfway down the next block. With a quick glance to each other, Izuku and Toru took off running to investigate. Almost immediately, Izuku noticed the pro-heroes on the scene and eagerly pushed through the crowd to get a closer look. His heart rate increased as he realized the situation. A villain had taken a hostage and apparently caused a lot of damage in the process. Backdraft was doing his best to keep numerous fires in the nearby buildings at bay, while Kamui Woods and Death Arms were just standing there? What's going on? He wondered out loud. Why aren't they doing anything? I think dash. Our quirks are pretty useless right now, Kamui Woods answered, startling the boy and accidentally interrupting Toru. With all the fire around, I'm at a huge disadvantage. Plus, Death Arms can't really punch out whatever liquid that villain is made of. That explains the weird sounds I'm getting from the villain, Izuku thought. He opened his mouth to reply when a new voice cut through the rest. Get the hell off of me, you dash. The voice was cut off as the owner was apparently pulled entirely into the villain's body, but it was enough. Kaken. Izuku shoved his way past the heroes. He ignored their shouts, ignored the fires. He ignored the danger. A single thought filled his mind. I have to save him. Blue and red flashed off the broken walls of the alley as the police did their best to disperse the gathered crowd. The villain had been taken into custody a few minutes prior, leaving behind a few officers to clear the scene and take witness statements. One of the witnesses, a boy with blonde hair and red eyes, sat off to the side on a piece of rubble, staring at his hands, ignoring the heroes who were praising his bravery. After a minute, Katsuki pushed himself to his feet, eyes scanning the area before his gaze landed on the two people he was looking for. Without thinking, he walked over to his two friends, shoving his hands in his pockets and putting on the best bored scowl he could muster. "Hey, Deku." The green-haired boy stiffened slightly before standing as well, Toru quickly following suit. "We need to talk." Izuku's face paled slightly as he swallowed and nodded. "I'm sorry, Toru. I'll text you later." The girl gestured in understanding, whispering something the blonde couldn't hear, before hugging her boyfriend and turning to leave. Without another word, Katsuki started walking in the opposite direction, not waiting for his friend to catch up. His mind was racing, trying to come to terms with what had just happened. Why had Izuku rushed in like that? How had he been able to hold his ground against the villain for as long as he had? Kaken? What's that? Why you wanted to talk? The blonde remained silent, fists clenched in his pockets. Something about the whole situation bothered him, and not just the fact that his best friend could have gotten himself killed. A long minute passed before Katsuki spoke. "You're a demon idiot, you know that?" He tried his best to keep his tone low, to keep from shouting, but it was a struggle. "You almost got your shitty butt killed?" I know that, but we both made it out okay, so dash? That's not the point." A small explosion burst from the blonde boy's palm as he pulled his hand free of his pocket, turning to face the shorter teen. "What if All Might hadn't been there to save your butt, huh? What would have happened then?" Izuku bowed his head. "I couldn't just stand there. I don't even know why I did what I did. I was like my feet. Just moved on their own." The boy's fists clenched until his knuckles turned white. "It's not like the other heroes were doing anything." Katsuki's eyes widened at the words. Never in his life did he expect to hear his friend say something bad about heroes. Well, except for that one. The bitterness and masked anger in his voice gave the blonde boy pause. The implications of the words hit him a moment later, causing a mix of emotions to bubble up in his tea. "Wait, are you saying you still want to be a hero? Even after?" Izuku snapped. Izuku had always admired heroes. For as long as he could remember, he would listen to the news or read articles describing hero fights, analyze heroes' quirks, and always have his ears open for any up-and-coming pros. He even could find good things to say about Endeavor, given the right circumstances. His biggest dream in life had been to become a hero himself one day. Then he lost his sight. His dreams were shattered before he had any chance of fulfilling them. How could he save someone he couldn't see? How could he fight a villain without his eyes? "I'm sure, in your own way, you'll be an amazing hero." Her words had awoken something within him. A longing to overcome, to be more than his limitations, to push beyond and do what everyone said was impossible. And it had worked. Thanks to Toru and Nana, he had cleared more than half of Dagoba Beach and expected to finish the rest within a few months. He had the tools to become the hero he'd always dreamed of becoming. But the world couldn't see that. His best friend couldn't see that. All anyone saw was a cripple. And to make matters worse, he couldn't even tell Kaken about his quirk. He'd had to keep everything a secret for a year and a half, and it was tearing him apart. "Wait, are you saying you still want to be a hero? Even after?" "Yes, Kaken." The force of Izuku's voice caused the blonde to take a step back, eyes going wider. He was done hiding. "I never stopped. All I've ever wanted was to be a hero. Even after going blind. Especially after what happened back there." Bewilderment and confusion crossed Katsuki's face, cutting off whatever counter-argument he was forming. "Do you know why no one was doing anything? It was because their quirks were useless." "Well, so what?" He took a shaking breath before looking his friend dead in the eye. "Heroes are more than just quirks." That kid, Nana thought to herself as she finally broke free from the gathered reporters. "I'm gonna have a little talk with him about self-preservation." She'd heard the commotion coming from the alleyway on her way home from the grocery store and managed to make it to the scene undetected. The presence of a villain had come as no surprise to her, obviously. What had surprised her, however, was the person fighting the villain. I have to admit that he held his own quite well. Not too surprising, considering how strong he's been training. Not to mention I took down that villain with a single hurricane fist. Reverting to her true form, Nana circled back around to retrieve her groceries, making sure nothing had been stolen or damaged in the commotion. Satisfied, she turned and began walking home. A few minutes later, she could hear the shouting. One voice was obviously her successor, who seemed to have lost all patience. The other voice was familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. Nana quickly ducked around a corner near the two boys to have a better vantage. Oh, you know why no one was doing anything? It was because their quirks were useless. She cringed at that. Well, that may have been the case, but that's no excuse. Well, so what? Her protégé continued. Heroes are more than just quirks. That's the spirit. The blonde boy quickly cut him off. Wait, that's the boy who'd been captured. Maybe not. But quirks make a big FANG difference. Deku. How long do you think someone without a quirk would last in a hero school, in UA even? Not a demon second. It may be your lifelong dream, but you've got no FING chance without a quirk. She could see the tears forming in Izuku's eyes as he shouted back. Well, that sure as hell isn't gonna stop me from trying. My vision has gotten to the point that I can put up a fight. You just saw that. How can I not at least try? You're just gonna get yourself hurt, Deku? Sure, you can't hear the world or some bullshit, but you're still FING quirkless? You can't be a hero. Now wait just 1 minute. Without thinking, Nana transformed into her All Might persona, stepping out from around the corner where she'd been hiding. All Might? The blonde's eyebrows shot up. What the foo dash? Young man, she interrupted. I think you've definitely got the wrong idea there. The boy's mouth hung open for a moment as he stared dumbly at the hero. Nana wanted to rip the kid a new one right there, but she held herself back. Judging by his actions back there, I'd say your friend here definitely has the heart of a hero. He risked his own safety to help someone in need, while pro-heroes stood by and watched. She flashed her trademark All Might smile before adding, if that's not a mark of a hero, then I don't know what is. Izuku's smile brightened at the praise, but the blonde boy's scowl returned. Art's good and all, but the nerd's still quirkless, not to mention blind. Hell, put those together, and he's basically a cripple. All Might's smile faded slowly as she shifted her gaze between the two boys. After a long moment of silence, she released a breath. You may be right, but that never stopped me. As she spoke, she slowly let her form fade. The wrinkles on her face reformed, the definition leaving her muscles as she revealed her true form. Katsuki's eyes blew wide open. What? How? Surprised? Nana said with a soft smile. Well, this is still me, kid. Wait, what the hell do you mean, that never stopped you? The scowl had returned in full force. You're All Might. There's no way you're a cripple? Nana almost spat the word at him, causing the boy to snap his mouth shut. The woman took a long, deep breath to calm herself. I may still have my power, kid, but not for much longer. She turned her back to the two teens and slowly raised her shirt, showing off what she knew to be a jagged keloid scar that twisted across her back and side. They both gasped in tandem. That's right, I never actually showed this to Midoriya. A long while back, I had a run-in with a particularly nasty villain. He gave me this for my trouble. Lowering her shirt, Nana turned back to face the two. Keeping up my hero form leaves me exhausted. Using it for too long actually causes a good amount of pain, and I lose strength the longer I keep it up. Not All Might, Izuku started, barely catching himself. You think? Nana held up her hand, cutting the boy off before turning back to the blonde. Bakugu, that's what it was. For these last few years, I've been looking for a successor. And a bit over a year ago, she turned to smile at Izuku, I found one. A brief silence fell between the three as Katsuki mulled over the hero's words in his mind. So, what you're saying is that you think Deku here can be the next All Might? Yeah, that sounds great and all, especially with the DM nerd always going on about heroes and shit, but he's still quirkless. Even if he does become a hero, he'll never be as powerful as either of us. The smile on All Might's face still can't believe this as if an All Might turned almost condescending, making the blonde boy even more set off. About the whole situation. You're absolutely right, kiddo, the heroine replied. Your explosions make it so you punch much harder than most people, and my quirk amplifies my strength exponentially. There's no way young Midoriya here could keep up. Katsuki smirked to himself, glancing over at the green-haired boy who didn't look fazed at all. The smirk faltered. Lucky for him, he's not quirkless. At least, not anymore. Katsuki's face turned to one of shock as the words registered, before he turned to glare at his friend. He felt his burn with anger? Frustration? Sadness? What the foo dash? Demon kid. Would you let me finish before you start blowing sheet up? The agitation in the hero's voice caused the blonde to pause. He hadn't even noticed the explosions forming on his palms. All Might took a deep breath before continuing. I'm assuming you've heard or read the speculations about what my quirk actually is. He nodded. It's a kind of muscle enhancement or some sheet, right? All Might smiled and shook her head. That's the most common guess, but no. My quirk is, in reality, a stockpile quirk that can be passed on. It stores the strength, will, and, in rare instances, quirks of its users, transferring it from wielder to wielder. Midoriya here is the newest holder of this power. Her smile faded slightly. When I said I was looking for a successor, it wasn't just for someone to take over as the symbol of peace, it was also for someone to take my power. She raised her hand to cut off the blonde's rebuttal. I'll still be All Might in the meantime. It takes a while for my power to disappear entirely. Katsuki was at a loss. He'd always seen Izuku as someone weak, someone who needed protection. Ever since the accident, he'd promised himself that he'd be the one to protect him when needed. Besides, if anyone decided to pick on the nerd, it'd just give Katsuki a chance to prove how strong he was. But now he has a quirk? He has All Might's quirk? He may not have been as obsessed with quirks as Deku was, but he still knew some things. Plus, giving away a quirk is impossible, isn't it? Would All Might lie about something like this? A hand resting on his shoulder pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to see Izuku smiling up at him, eyes not quite meeting his. Think of it this way, Kaken, the shorter boy said. If you know, when we both get into UA, we'll be rivals. We'll be able to help each other get even stronger. Katsuki huffed, his mind still reeling from the overload of information, but he grinned back nonetheless. Let's just see if you can keep up. You know, if it hadn't been All Might, I'd have thought the whole thing was bullshit. A rock skidded across the sidewalk, displaced by the blonde teen's shoe as he kicked it. Still, Deku with a DMN quirk? His eyes were fixed on the sunset overhead. He'd walked home this way so many times, it had almost become second nature to him. I don't think I'd believe it even if I did see it. Katsuki's pace slowed as he neared his house. Gazing down at his hands, he let off 2 small explosions before looking back up into the sky. There was not a doubt in his mind that he would be making it into UA's heroics course. But Deku? All I've ever wanted was to be a hero. Even after going blind. Think of it this way, Kaken. When we both get into UA, we'll be rivals. His signature smirk slowly spread across his face. Well, quirkless or not, I'm gonna be sad if you back out on that promise. A few explosions let loose. 'Cause I may not be able to protect you otherwise.